Without objection. Thank you. Mr. Secretary.
Mr. Chairman, thank you to you and to Ranking Member Smith, Ms. Sanchez, for your comments, and to all the members of this committee. We very much appreciate an opportunity to appear before you and present the FY2015 budget and be prepared to try to explain not just the numbers, but also the reasons and the rationale behind the decisions that we put forward to plan for our future and to associate that plan with the realities of, yes, of the resources that we have, but also in coordination with the QDR, what was the strategy behind all of this, and we're prepared to do that. I also want to acknowledge Chairman Dempsey, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who has been a tremendous partner in this effort. I know this committee values his leadership and his service to his country, as we all do, and I just want to acknowledge his service, and the Vice Chairman, as well as all the chiefs and all of our military leaders. And with us today also is the senior enlisted member of our armed forces, and we very much appreciate our enlisted men and women who make it work, who make the system go. You've acknowledged Bob Hale's contributions, Mr. Chairman. I would just add that everything you said is accurate. I know this body deals in accuracy, and I wanted to, for the record, note that he has been as close to an indispensable element of our efforts, not just this year in putting together. It was a very difficult year, which we all went through, 16 days of government shutdown and furloughs, uncertainty, no budget, continuing resolutions. But it was Bob Hale and his team that were really the anchor that kept all this together, and we will miss him greatly. But he deserves to escape, and we will keep his phone number handy for any future reference. Mr. Chairman, you asked if I would make a couple of brief comments about the current situation in Ukraine that obviously is dominating everybody's thinking and concerns today. And let me do that, and then I will address my points in the opening statement regarding the budget, and then ask Chairman Dempsey for his comments. Mr. Chairman, this administration's efforts have been focused on first de-escalating, continuing to de-escalate the crisis in Ukraine, supporting the new Ukrainian government with economic assistance, with a particular interest and focus on the diplomatic tracks, economic tracks, which we are doing. Secretary Kerry is currently in a meeting with Foreign Minister Lavrov. I think you all are aware of the news that NATO met again. The European Union met again today. OSCE has observers starting to get into Ukraine. Different decisions have been made by some of our European partners, one being the announcement yesterday of the European Union's $15 billion package of economic assistance to Ukraine. As you all know, Secretary Kerry noted we would commit $1 billion, and I appreciate, and I know the President does, the Congress's early review of that $1 billion economic assistance package to Ukraine. And we are also focused on reaffirming our commitments to allies in Central and Eastern Europe. I strongly support these efforts, the way it is being handled, the steps the President has taken to apply both the diplomatic and economic pressure on Russia, and the continued collaboration, coordination with our European partners. This includes the new visa restrictions and an executive order authorizing sanctions that the White House announced this morning. Earlier this week, as you know, I directed Department of Defense to suspend all military-to-military engagements and exercises with Russia. And yesterday I announced a series of steps that we'll take to reinforce allies in Central and Eastern Europe during this crisis. These include stepping up our joint training through our aviation detachment in Poland, and I was advised this morning that that continues to move forward. I visited Poland a few weeks ago, and we are going to augment our participation in NATO's ballistic air policing mission, and was advised this morning that we have six F-16s that have arrived in Latvia as of the last 24 hours. The events of the past week, I think to all of us, underscore the need for America's continued global engagement and leadership. The President's defense budget reflects that reality, and it helps sustain our commitments and our leadership at a defining moment. Mr. Chairman, I believe this budget is far more than a set of numbers or just a list of decisions. It is both of those. But it's a statement of values and priorities. It's a realistic budget that prepares the United States military to defend our national security in a world that is becoming less predictable, more volatile, and in some ways more threatening to our country and our interests. It's a plan that allows our military to meet America's future challenges and threats. It matches our resources to our strategy, and it's a product of collaboration. All of DoD's military, civilian leaders were involved in this process. As I noted, the chairman, the vice chairman, our service secretaries, our service chiefs, combatant commanders, senior enlisted, all at every level of our military leadership had input into this process. As we all know, America has been at war for the last 13 years. And as we end our second war of the last decade, our longest ever, this budget adapts and adjusts to new strategic realities and fiscal constraints while preparing for the future. This budget is not business as usual. We're all living at a very unusual time. It may well be, when history records this time, a very defining time. I don't think any of us, no matter how many years you've been in Congress, have ever worked through something like we're working through and have worked through the last 24 months of uncertainty, unpredictability, not just with resources and budgets, but how that ripples out and the consequences of that to every decision you make, I make, the leadership of this government makes. It begins to make the hard choices that will have to be made. The longer we defer these difficult decisions, the more risk we will have down the road, forcing our successors to face far more complicated and difficult choices in the future. Last year, DoD's budget was cut $37 billion because of sequestration, on top of the $487 billion 10-year reduction under the Budget Control Act that DoD was already implementing. December's bipartisan budget agreement gave DoD some temporary relief, but it still imposes more than $75 billion in cuts over the next 2 years. And unless Congress changes the law, sequestration will cut another $50 billion each year, starting again in fiscal year 2016. The President's 5-year plan provides a realistic alternative to sequestration level cuts, projecting $115 billion more than current law allows. DoD requires that additional funding to implement our updated defense strategy as outlined in the Quadrennial Defense Review. As you know, the QDR takes a strategy-driven look at the security landscape over the coming decades. This QDR is not budget-driven, or is it budget-blind? It builds on the President's defense strategic guidance and is informed by our resource limitations. It defines the risk assumed, both under the President's budget and under sequestration. Accounting for budget uncertainty and fiscal reality was the only realistic way to ensure a useful and relevant strategy. These are not ordinary times. The strategic priorities articulated in the QDR represent America's highest security interests: defending the homeland, building security globally, deterring aggression, and being ready and capable to win decisively against any adversary. The funding levels in the President's budget let us execute this strategy, with some increased risks, and we've been very clear about those risks in certain areas. These risks would be reduced if Congress approves the President's Opportunity, Growth, and Security Initiative, a proposal that would provide DoD with an additional $26 billion in fiscal year 2015 to improve readiness and modernization. My submitted statement, Mr. Chairman, contains details of this initiative, which I strongly support. Although our 5-year budget plan exceeds sequestration levels, over the past year, DoD has prepared detailed planning for continued sequestration level cuts. This showed that a return to sequestration would impose some force structure reductions that simply can't be implemented with the push of a button. It takes time to plan and implement. They require detailed planning, and they reply and need longer time horizons. Our 5-year defense plan, therefore, hedges and includes the sequestration level force structure reductions that take longest to plan and to implement. The decommissioning of the aircraft carrier USS George Washington and the Army and Marine Corps in-strength cuts below our preferred levels. This was a responsible thing to do, given the uncertainty and the irregularity that has marked this budget process, and the fact that sequestration remains the law of the land for fiscal year 2016 and beyond. Our preferred force levels are fully funded in fiscal year 2015, and DoD leaders all agree that they can be sustained at the President's budget levels. Accordingly, I have issued formal guidance to service leadership that we will fund our preferred force levels: 440 to 450,000 active Army, 182,000 Marines, and 11 aircraft carriers, and not make these sequestration level reductions if we judge that Congress will fund DoD at the President's budget levels over the next 5 years. DoD has a responsibility to prepare for all eventualities, just as Congress has a responsibility to provide DoD with some budget predictability. My submitted statement explains our budget details, Mr. Chairman, and the rationale behind all of our key decisions. But I want to, before I close, briefly address a couple of very critical issues. First, the balance between readiness, capability, and capacity. After more than a decade of long, large stability operations, we traded some capacity to protect readiness and to protect modernization. We did this as we shift to focus on future requirements shaped by enduring and emerging threats. We have to be able to defeat terrorist threats and deter adversaries with increasingly modern weapons and technological capabilities. We must also assure that America's economic interests are protected through open sea lanes, freedom of the skies and space, and deal with one of the most urgent and real threats facing all nations, and that is cyber attacks. That's why we protected funding for cyber and special operations forces. For the active duty Army, we proposed drawing down about 440 to 450,000 soldiers. That's less than 10% below its size pre-9/11. I believe this is adequate. Our leaders believe it is adequate for future demand. We will continue investing in high-end ground capabilities to keep our soldiers the most advanced on earth. Army National Guard and Reserve units will remain a vibrant part of our national defense and will draw down by 5%. We will also streamline Army helicopter force structure by reducing Guard's fleet by 8%. The active Army fleet will be cut by 25%, but we will still maintain and keep these helicopters modernized as we move from a fleet of 7 models to 4. The Navy, for its part, will take 11 ships out of its operational inventory, but they will be modernized and returned to service with greater capability and longer lifespan. The Marine Corps will continue its planned drawdown to 182,000, but will devote 900 more Marines to increased embassy security. And the Air Force will retire the aging A-10, replacing it with more advanced multi-mission aircraft like the Joint Strike Fighter. The specifics, numbers, and reasons for all my recommendations are included in the statement, my full statement. Regarding compensation reform, taking care of our people, Mr. Chairman, as everyone on this committee knows, means providing them with both fair compensation as well as the training and the tools they need to succeed in battle and always return home safely. To meet those obligations under constrained budgets, we need some modest adjustments to the growth in pay and benefits. All these savings will be reinvested in training and equipping our troops. And there are no proposals to change retirement in this budget. Let me clarify what these compensation adjustments are and are not. First, we will continue to recommend pay raises. They won't be substantial, as in the past years, as substantial, but they will continue. Second, we will continue subsidizing off-base housing. The 100% benefit of today will be reduced, but only to 95%, and it will be phased in over the next several years. Third, we are not shutting down any commissaries. We recommend gradually phasing out some subsidies, but only for domestic commissaries that are not in remote locations. Fourth, we recommend simplifying and modernizing our 3 TRICARE programs by merging them into one TRICARE system with modest increases in copays and deductibles for retirees and family members, and encourage using the most affordable means of care. Active duty personnel will still receive health care that is entirely free. The President's defense budget supports our defense strategy, defends this country, and keeps our commitments to our people. However, these commitments would be seriously jeopardized by a return to sequestration-level spending. My submitted testimony details how sequestration would compromise our national security. The result would be a military that could not fulfill its defense strategy, putting at risk America's traditional role as a guarantor of global security and ultimately our own security. This is not the military the President nor I want. It isn't the military that this committee or this Congress wants for America's future. But it is the path we are on, unless Congress does something to change the law. Mr. Chairman, members of this committee, DoD leaders, and I look forward to working with you as we make the difficult choices, and there will be difficult choices to be made, to ensure that America's security is there, will be there, and to ensure that we protect America's national interests. Thank you.
Chairman, do you have an opening statement?
I can submit my opening statement for the record if you need the time to allow the members to ask questions.
Votes have already been called. We're about 5 minutes into the first vote, and it looks like we're going to be like 45 minutes. Could you just briefly summarize your statement, and then we will recess, okay, and then we'll come back and get into the questions.
Okay. Thanks, Chairman, Ranking Member Smith. Members, appreciate your teamwork in trying to help us work our way through not only our national security needs, but the resources available to meet them. Just want you all to know I am deeply engaged in our efforts to support the diplomatic approach to the resolution of Ukraine's crisis. I'm engaged with our NATO allies. I've spoken both yesterday and today with my Russian counterpart, General Valery Gerasimov, and we'll continue to maintain that line of communication. Secondly, just returned from Afghanistan, and I would be remiss, we would all be remiss, if we don't recall that we've got roughly 34,000 young men and women in uniform, and many more than that, civilians continuing to serve in Afghanistan to ensure our continued security. And by the way, elsewhere around the globe, hundreds of thousands in more than 90 countries. What I left Afghanistan reminding those who serve there is 2015 appears to be uncertain, but we've got a lot of work left to do in 2014, and you can be sure that we will. And that brings me to the budget. the balance between our security demands and our available resources has rarely been more delicate. Secretary walked you through the measures we're taking in this budget to try to balance as best we can national security and fiscal responsibilities. And, Mr. Chairman, I'll end there.
Thank you very much. We will recess until the last vote, and then I would ask all the members to return as quickly as you can. We'll get right into the questioning. Thank you very much. Committee stands in recess. What's that?
There's no minority right now.
None?
I agree. Right, wait. There he is. I think he's gonna say hi. Shut this off while we're waiting.
Committee will come to order. I apologize. That 45 minutes grew to a lot more than that. I wish the budget would go up like that. I'm going to go ahead and get started because your time is valuable and members will be coming in. But I would like to have some clarification. You know, when we met, I think it was last week when you first rolled out the budget, you went through the numbers and we talked about the Army going down to 440,000. But as I've looked at the numbers, it appears to me that it really goes down to 420. The 440 is if sequestration goes away. I don't see any way that it's going away right now, and I think we need to clarify the confusion. The budget, we have the base budget that we agreed to, the budget committee agreed to in December, where they worked out the numbers between the House and the Senate, signed by the President. We came to a top line, and that's, I think, what the base budget is. But then we also hear talk of the $115 billion on top of that goes for the next 4 years. But that's above the sequestration number. And then there's the $26 billion that's or the $56 billion that would be 26 for defense and 26 or 28 for defense and 28 for social spending. If some way something magical happened and we came up with some more money. But my understanding is the Senate isn't even going to pass a budget this year. We're basically going to have the number that was agreed to earlier and signed into law. So I'm really not paying much attention to the 115, and I'm not paying much attention to that 58 because I think that's in the realm of it would be wonderful, but it's not going to happen. And so I think we really have to live within right now something that I hate, and I'm sure you do, and I think most of the members of the committee do, but it is the law, and we're stuck with it right now. So that would, am I clear on that? Is that the way it is? And is the Army, based on that, going down to an end strength of 420,000, and the Marines going down to 175,000?
Let me respond, Mr. Chairman, then I'll ask the comptroller for his thoughts as well. Yes, what you've said as to what is in our budget request for 2015, I think, is pretty clear. Based on the bipartisan budget agreement cap, the $26 billion that you refer to is an additional request to try to buy back some of the readiness and modernization that we've lost over the last 2 years because of the huge abrupt cuts. So that's one part of it. Then the next piece, the FIDA, take the next 5 years, the $115 billion additional request, which is the President's budget request. The plan that we have submitted along with that budget request does do what you said, factors in the reality of what the current law is now and reverts back to as far as reimposing sequestration in FY 2016. Now, let me make one comment on why it was done that way, and then I'll ask the comptroller for his thoughts. We didn't get any adjustment in our numbers, as you know, until December, until the Congress came up with a bipartisan budget agreement, which then subsequently the President signed. So all year long, we had been preparing a budget based on the law, just as you said, the reality of that, which actually began, and we never ever stopped putting budgets together, as you know. But when I first directed the Strategic Choices and Management Review back in May, that very much informed us, that process, as well as the QDR and so on, as to what kind of budget we were going to report and present, which the Congress wants it. You've always wanted it on time. So we were under that deadline. So December comes along, we get new numbers, and so on and so on. Rather than going back and starting all over and replanning for a whole new set of fit-up plans based on some of these new numbers, what we decided to do was take those post-2016 planning, just as you say, for the reality of we may go back to the law, sequestration. But we deferred the tougher decisions on the time it takes to Army end strength being one of it, carrier being another. And I noted this in my opening statement. I go into considerable detail, Mr. Chairman, in the written statement. We can make those adjustments as we go along. The chiefs were part of this decision. I issued a formal memo on this week. Chiefs supported it. They're in agreement with that. But let me stop there and see if the comptroller wants to add anything.
Well, let me just briefly address fiscal 2015, the only year you're going to focus on. Is this better? Okay. Let me just briefly address 2015, the year for which you will authorize and appropriate funds. In that year, we have We have the Army will go down, if my memory serves me right, to 490,000 by the end of 15, and that we fully fund our ability in 15 to maintain 11 carriers once the Ford comes in. So this is not an issue until the out years, and then as the Secretary said, because of the uncertainty, because of the time to plan, yes, in a few cases, Army and strength carriers, the out years, far out years of our 5-year plan do show decline to sequester levels. If we get an indication that Congress will appropriate at the higher levels, we will reverse that and go to our preferred force levels in later plans. But for 15, it's not an issue. Does that help?
Yeah, I think I understand it. I want to make sure the American people understand it. I want them to know what it is really right now, so that they understand how bad it is, and if we're going to be able to change sequestration, I think the American people are going to have to. I saw stories, it seemed to get people's attention, taking the Army down to 440,000. I want them to know it's going down to 420,000. And then if they got upset with 440, they ought to really get upset with 420. Then we ought to start looking for more resources to get that up to a better number.
Mr. Chairman, if I might,
Sure.
That's exactly why the President has asked for $115 billion more to fulfill the strategies, the strategic interests that we need, the country needs to protect this country. How we do that, and we say clearly, this is about as transparent a process as I think has ever been run at the Pentagon. Everybody knows the risk, and if we get sequestration back, we risk a number of things, and the Army will go to 420,000. Now, tough choices are coming here. You're going to have to help us make them. There isn't any way around it. You got so much of a budget, so many resources, as you know, I know, and I think that's your point.
I've heard that a genius is somebody that understands something after they've heard it 6 times, and I'm no genius. And I just want to make sure that people really get it. Sometimes we chew on these numbers so much that we think that everybody gets it, and they may be hearing they may think that we've got that 115 billion, or they may think that we've got that 58 billion, and I want to make sure they understand, unless some law changes, we don't. Chairman, you had a comment? I
just wanted to add briefly, Chairman, that I know you've had some concerns about the QDR and the thought that it was too resource constrained.
Some real concerns about it.
No, I know, but I will say what the JCS have found useful, and that's probably the right word about the QDR, is that it is unconstrained in the sense that the budget and the $115 billion that's over the BCA levels is a reflection that it's not resource constrained. It's certainly resource informed. And beyond that, as you point out, Marine Corps and Army end strength is not accounted for any place right now. And so the QDR force that we've described is literally unconstrained by resources, in the sense that we've given our best advice on what we think we need to meet the security needs of the nation.
The second part of my question is, I think I get where the money is right now, and how the force is going down. There's talk of what our strategy is, and I really don't know what our strategy is. I think since World War II up until a couple of years ago, it was fight 2 major conflicts at the same time. Then I think we went to fight 1 and hold 1. Has there been any change from that, or is that our strategy?
That's part of the strategy. I noted this in my opening comments, Mr. Chairman. But first, we built the QDR off of the President's Defense Strategic Guidance that he issued, as you know, in January of 2012. First priority is to protect the homeland. Another priority is to deter and defeat aggression globally. Another priority is global stability around the world and global security development globally. And the fourth of being able to defeat and also deal with a second front anywhere in the world. Defeat an adversary and win a war globally, and also deal with a second front, a second war. So when I say there are two pieces to that, I don't think you can measure a strategy just on that alone. We've added, for example, new capabilities, increased funding in cyber, in special operations, in intelligence, security, and reconnaissance. The world is more complicated. In many ways, it is more dangerous, but it is more decentralized. There are different kinds of threats. We plan for every contingency. Large wars, every possible threat to this country. So we've tried to balance that with the force structure, the modernization, the readiness, the capability that we thought we would need. And I think in the QDR we reflect that pretty clearly.
And then with the complication and the of how much more difficult the world has become, one of the things that I think you've spoken about is that we're taking more risk, and all I've heard is more risk. Can we explain that a little bit more? How that comes down? To me, more risk means, like we've done after every war, going into the next war, we lose a lot more lives because we have taken ourselves down too far, and that losing lives is what the risk is to me.
We do lay out the specifics of that risk, and I'll mention a couple, and then this might be a good question for the chairman to respond to as well. But we lay these things out pretty clearly, I think, not only in my longer statement in QDR, but also in just conversations we've had, the combatant commanders who will be up here. We have two of them over on the Senate side today. You have hearings scheduled for the next few weeks.
We had 3 yesterday.
3 yesterday. They'll lay these things out clearly too. But those risks. But here, let me just take one general perspective on this and give it to you on what does this actually mean when you talk about risks. And then I'll ask the chairman if that's okay to respond. Risks are more than just reducing numbers. It isn't just capacity. Part of it, it's the readiness of the force you have. Are they capable, ready, agile? Are they modern? Are they equipped? Do they need what they require? Can they be moved on time? Can we respond quickly all over the world to any contingency? Those are also part of the arc of the risk that clearly that we would subject our military to, but our country to. The further down you take this budget, because we won't have the resources to provide that modernization, to provide that readiness. We already know that from the last 2 years, especially last year, when our Navy, Air Force, and Army, Marines were all cutting back on their readiness, training, and everything that goes with it, the support systems that go with it. So if that's a good jumping off point generally, let me ask the chairman to respond to that as well. Thank you.
And let me give you a brief answer in this setting and then commit to following up with you, because the issue of risk is a very complex subject. But we generally measure risk in capability, capacity, and readiness. The capability of the joint force, how it works together, which is to say, what can it do? Capacity, how often can it do it, based on the size of the force? And then the third one is readiness. And so the way I would describe the risk we face today is we have a significant near-term readiness risk that has been accruing. And we've testified to this before, that we're digging ourselves a readiness hole out of which it will take us several years to climb. So near-term readiness is the real risk we run. eventually we can bring the force into balance where the money we're committing and investing, enough of it goes into manpower, enough into training, enough into readiness, enough into modernization, enough into infrastructure. We can bring it into balance. If we go to full sequestration, the risk we run there is it's too small, frankly. The capacity becomes the limiting factor, and I think we've articulated that as well as we can, but we'll keep at it.
See, I think one of the main reasons why we want the military to be so strong is it keeps us out of war. The deterrent is only a deterrent until it stops becoming a deterrent, and then we all pay a big price, especially those in uniform that are out there that have to do it. So thank you very much. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to particularly thank Undersecretary Hale for his service. It's probably the last time you appear before us, and admit it, you'll miss us. Okay, probably not, but there are other aspects of the job I'm sure you'll miss, and just, in all seriousness, you've done a fabulous job. Been great to work with, and gosh, I can't imagine more difficult times for the person who's supposed to look after the budget and try to figure out what's going on. And just following up on the chairman's remarks, I actually think it's fairly clear. About 3 years ago, this administration said, looking out at the next 10 years, what should our defense strategy be? Now, we get into this interesting argument about whether or not that strategy should be at all informed by the amount of resources that you anticipate having. I've long felt that it's just common sense that, of course, any strategy you're going to put together is going to be informed, at least in part, by the amount of resources that you anticipate having. And you can put together a beautiful strategy, but if you don't have the money, then that's not going to be a very effective strategy. But I'll leave that debate aside for the moment. Just say whatever it was, put together a strategy, and it anticipated cutting, a decrease in the increase, really, of roughly $500 billion over the course of 10 years, and then built that strategy. Well, that was all well and good until the Budget Control Act came along and took another $487 billion whack out of the budget. And then, of course, sequestration hit for 2 years, couple CRs, and you wound up with substantially less money than you thought you were going to have when you built that strategy. And I think what is reflective of this budget that the President submitted is the fact that this budget in FY2015, but especially going forward with 8 more years of sequestration still on the books, that amount of money is not enough to adequately fund the strategy that the President and DOD would like to do. And that is why they put in $115 billion for the 4 out years. That is why they said, here's $28 billion more we'd like to have. And by the way, it wasn't just magical thinking. They did actually put in offsets for the 28 billion, or for the 56, counting the other discretionary spending. They put offsets in and said, look, if we could do it, if the law could be changed, we would like to not spend money here and spend $28 billion more on defense. Sequestration and where we're at is going to be devastating to defense. But I will say that one of the things that harms the ability of the American people to understand this is the fact that the message that has come out ever since a week ago when the budget was first not quite released, but at least explained when, Mr. Secretary, you sort of gave the outline of it, is the message from the Republican Party has been Obama's cutting defense. So the American people get the impression that, look, there's not really a problem here. If the administration would simply choose not to cut defense, everything would be fine. And that's simply false. The administration has budgeted to the number that we all gave him. I mean, the chairman sort of acknowledged that just a moment ago. I wrote down the quote here. It's the law, and we are stuck with it right now. So why, if that is the case, we continually hear Republicans saying the Obama administration is bound and determined to cut defense, and that's all this is about. As long as you deliver that message, we got no hope in getting out of this, because the American people will just say, well, he can change his mind, we're fine. No, sequestration, the law of the land that we passed, and yes, the President signed, we're all in this together, but the top line is the top line. That's the number we've got. This budget does not choose to cut defense. It merely follows the law that has been passed. Now, and I think a lot of people on this committee, want to see that law change. I would turn off sequestration tomorrow without an offset. I think sequestration has been devastating to this economy, and more than anything, devastating to our national security. Now, I would prefer that we come up with some grand bargain and get tax increases and reductions in time, find some way to have a better balance. But if I have to choose between where we're at now and simply turning off sequestration so we stop kicking the hell out of our defense budget, and not incidentally our infrastructure and all manner of other important aspects of the discretionary budget, I'd turn it off. But that's not going to happen. And I think the chairman acknowledges that. So we got the number we got. Now, the important thing about this hearing is going to be how this body chooses to approach what you guys have already approached. You've had to make the decision. You've had to put together a budget based on that top-line law of the land that's not going to change. You haven't had the luxury of the fantasy that we all have to imagine that somehow we can oppose every cut, offer no alternative cuts, and complain about the size of the budget. So, you've made the decision on the A-10. You made the decision on force structure, on mothballing 11 cruisers, on a lot of compensation issues, including the housing allowance, some minor savings in the commissaries, whole bunch of issues which are politically unpopular. And I hope, though I doubt this will be the case, that over the course of the next couple of hours, we don't just beat you up over every isolated one of those decisions. I hope that if we say we don't like this decision, we will say, well, here's what I would have done differently. Here's a cut that I would have made that would put the force in a better place. Because I do not expect this body to simply rubber stamp what you offered us. Not our job. We're supposed to exercise oversight. If we disagree, we'll make some changes. We had the whole Block 30 U2 thing, and we disagreed. Now we're moving it. That's fine. But to simply say the administration is fecklessly cutting the budget and not offer an alternative is really going to spin us into the ground in all the ways that you just described. So I hope we have a more productive discussion on that. I will ask, of that series of things that you all are out there, of the cuts that have been made, did you consider alternatives? If we were to come along, for instance, and say, but I think it's $3.5 billion if we don't get rid of the A-10, it's I forget, it's like $4 billion, $5 billion for the cruisers. Let's take $10 billion of those cuts. And I will give you the thought experiment, which we ought to be doing, but haven't to this point, and say if you were going to get $10 billion from someplace other than those things that we just talked about, what else did you consider and what might be an option?
Mr. Smith, thank you. We did, and we have presented some of those. I'll just give you an example on the $26 billion that we have asked for increase in this budget, this top-line budget for FY2015. We would roughly take that money, if that's what you're talking about, and then the out-year money, too, if we could get the...
No, that's not what I'm talking about. Okay. Sorry, maybe I wasn't clear there. What I'm saying is, accept the top line as it is, okay? You've made the cuts that you've made. I'm not talking about what would you add. I'm talking about if you were to get, if you get political pushback, for instance, to the tune of $10 billion. We won't retire the A-10, we won't mothball the cruisers, we won't reduce the housing allowance, whatever. Let's say that we, I think the number is going to be a little bit higher than $10 billion that we want to whack out of it, unfortunately, but let's be modest for the moment and say we whack out $10 billion of your cuts. What would you have to do? How would you make up that $10 billion?
Well, and I know the chairman wanted to respond as well. If it's a matter of whacking out, if that's your question, those decisions as to which programs, which platforms, where would you continue to take those $10 billion cuts or whatever, we have thought through that. And that is part of the risk that we talk about, that we lay out, and I'll ask the chairman to go into more specifics, but let me just generally make this comment, as I already have. We'll have to continue to put our security and our ability to protect this country at risk, because you're going to continue to take down the entire infrastructure which supports readiness, continues to give us a modernization edge.
It's always helpful to see what readiness is. Okay. Basically, you won't... General, why don't you take a crack?
Yeah, Ranking Member Smith, we've tried to keep the joint force in balance. You'll hear some think tanks suggest, well, get rid of a service or completely, change the structure of our aviation capabilities. I'd be happy to enter into the record a document here that's titled, "What Does $1 Billion Buy?" It's just a menu of, so if you were to whack out $10 billion, you could get a sense, I think, for where we would have to go to find that. So here's just some examples. On the modernization side, $1 billion buys 10 joint strike fighters. That's an example. Or 2 littoral combat ships, or 5 P-8s, 980 precision-guided munitions. And on the readiness side, $1 billion pays for 12 F-16 squadrons to maintain readiness for a year, or 3 Army Brigade combat teams readiness for a year. So we can tell you with some clarity, not some clarity, with great clarity, what we would have to do if you don't accept our recommendations, and then it would, you'll have to decide whether that is a even greater cost than the ones that we are proposing.
That is exactly what I was looking for. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Thornberry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Secretary, it seems to me, regardless of how the overall budget issues are decided, it is a matter of some urgency for both of us to try to get more value out of the money we spend on defense. And I know there's lots of folks here who want to work with you to assist in reducing the overhead and bureaucracy costs of the department. But the chairman and Mr. Smith also are interested in acquisition reform, taking the next steps to try to be smarter about the goods and services that we buy. We've had very positive discussions with Mr. Kendall, for example, and working together. But what I want to ask you is this. It looks to me like a lot of to really get to the heart of some of the acquisition issues, it's more than Mr. Kendall's shop. It gets into personnel issues and a whole variety of things that really only at the top, with some attention, can these issues be solved. So lots of demands for your time and attention, I realize. But my question is improving our acquisition system one of those things that you think is important enough for you to devote personal attention to trying to make it happen, working with both the House and the Senate to get more value out of the money we spend?
Congressman, it is. I've made that a priority. The Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisitions, Mr. Kendall, who, as you appropriately note, has been working very closely with this committee as well as in the Senate on this issue, meets with me once a week on this particular issue. I get a briefing from him. He goes over where we are, what have we done, what have we accomplished, better buying power, all the different programs that are now in place. We can do better. We must do better. We have put a particular focus on efficiency. I didn't just start that. As you know, Secretary Gates was focused on it. Panetta was focused on it. I'm focused on it. We have to do that. I think Secretary Kendall is doing an extremely effective job at this. We've restructured that department. He's restructured it. It's across the board. It's everything we're doing. And part of that is driven, of course, by the realities of resource restraints.
Sure.
But you have to do it, and we're doing it.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. I do, as I say, I think it's going to require your attention to overcome some of these obstacles because there's just going to be a reluctance to change. General Dempsey, let me change the subject completely. There are some people, as you know, who express admiration for what Mr. Snowden has done and his illegal disclosures. Most people don't realize that a lot of what he has disclosed has nothing to do with NSA, but it has to do with our military. So in this setting, can you describe best you can, what damage his disclosures have done to our military and how much it's going to cost to fix them?
The candid answer is we don't know yet, but let me tell you what we do know. The vast majority of the documents that Mr. Snowden exfiltrated from our highest levels of security, the vast majority, had nothing to do with exposing government oversight of domestic activities. The vast majority of those were related to our military capabilities, operations, tactics, techniques, and procedures. We've got a mitigation oversight task force that the Secretary of Defense has chartered, where with other agencies of government, we're working our way through that which we believe he has exfiltrated, and we have, I think, a fairly significant amount of knowledge in that regard. And looking at the red teaming it, if you will, looking at what it could be used for, and trying to mitigate the effects. The mitigation task force will need to function for about 2 years. That's the magnitude of this challenge. And I suspect it could cost billions of dollars to overcome the loss of security that has been imposed on us.
Thank you, Ms. Sanchez.
Mr. Chairman, and thank you again, Secretary Hagel and General Dempsey, for being before us. And I understand that the department had to work with the budget that the Congress set for you. And I understand also that under such budgetary constraints, you have to make trade-offs. However, while the President proposes cutting the National Guard and reserves, reducing commissary services, retiring aircraft, and reducing the U.S. military's end strength, some cuts of which I agree with and some I don't, especially when we see the real details, we'll be able to tell better. The Department of Defense continues to make an exception for nuclear weapons spending. According to the CBO, between 2014 and 2023, the cost of the administration's plans for nuclear forces will total over $355 billion. And as we know, the United States has the largest arsenal of nuclear weapons. And I find it extremely disturbing that we're continuing to spend such significant amounts on nuclear weapons when we have more than enough to meet our national security needs. And I don't know about my colleagues, but I would rather keep my National Guard and reserves than have another round of nuclear weapons built. And so if you can both comment on that and provide this committee with an answer on whether you believe nuclear non-proliferation activities are important, because this 2015 budget continues, at least to demonstrate to me, that the department doesn't give it a high priority. You have cut again GTRI, and I'm concerned about the non-proliferation programs. If you could answer that, I would like that.
Thank you, Congresswoman. First, let me just make a general comment about the prioritization of the budget and where we cut and priorities we made. As General Dempsey just noted, as I noted in my opening statement, we came at this from a balanced perspective. How do we balance our forces, our modernization, our research, our technology, our people, the obligations we have to the people, our commitments around the world? So that's first. Specific to your nuclear question. First, nuclear weapons have been, I think most everybody agrees, our ability to possess nuclear weapons and the capability that has brought us has probably done as much to deter aggression, nuclear deterrence, and the start of a World War III as any one thing. Other things, too. The safe, reliable, secure, and ready maintenance and posture of those nuclear weapons that we do have and which have been coming down, as you know, through a series of treaties, the most recent being the New START Treaty, which the Senate, as you know, ratified just a couple of years ago, continues to reduce our nuclear warheads and delivery mechanisms. We are complying with that New START Treaty now. We are doing the things that we believe we must do to maintain that safe, secure, ready nuclear force, at the same time balancing all our other interests as well. But it is an important part of our arsenal, the triad system that has been a significant deterrent in the world since World War II. But that doesn't negate the efforts on non-proliferation. I think the President's position has been very clear on this. That said, we live in the real world that we live in, so I think we've balanced this about right. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think you wanted my insights as well, and I speak in this regard on behalf of the Joint Chiefs because, of course, we have discussed and debated this among ourselves, and I think we've allocated an appropriate and adequate amount of money into non-proliferation in our budget. And in terms of the nuclear arsenal, we are firmly committed. Our recommendation is to remain firmly committed to the triad, the three legs of the nuclear capability, and that any further reduction should be done only through negotiations, not unilaterally, and that we should commit to modernizing the stockpile while we've got it.
I look forward to delving deeper into this subject. In
I
this
just,
hearing. Thank you.
based on your question, told the staff that we need to have a classified briefing, and that will be open to all members of the committee. I think it's time that we have that again.
As
Mr.
Mr.
Forbes.
Chairman, I get the opportunity to sit on that strategic
Excuse me
forces.
just a second.
I get an opportunity to sit on that strategic forces. I think it would be very interesting for everybody to really figure out what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Forbes.
Gentlemen, thank you all for coming here. We just wish we had more time to listen to you. And, Mr. Secretary, I know you had limited time to talk about the funding, and if you'd had more time, because I know you pointed out the $37 billion of sequestration and the impacts on there, I know if you'd had more time, you'd have probably talked about the $778 billion of cuts the administration took before sequestration, $291 billion in their what they called self-imposed efficiencies, and then $487 billion. And we're going to give you this chart that the HASS staff prepared and ask if you'd reply back in writing if any of those numbers are incorrect. Second thing is, I've heard kind of this movement of the president's just complying with the law, but in point of fact, this budget's $115 billion above the law. And then I hear that the president is trying to get his defense strategy, but this budget's actually $345 billion less than the budget submitted for the defense strategy in 2012, which the chairman testified then on April 19th. If we cut one more dollar, we couldn't do the defense strategy. So at some time, if you just respond back to us in writing as to whether my numbers are incorrect. Second thing, if you'd let us know any time, because I just must have missed the hearing, I wasn't there, that the administration on any of the $778 billion of cuts ever expressed concern and said, this is too many cuts, we shouldn't be doing those, if you'd get back to us on those. Chairman Dempsey, I'd like to ask you, I'm concerned because when this administration came into office, the Russians asked us to take our missile defense systems out of Europe. We did it. We turned on the TV. Didn't work too well for us. Second thing I'm concerned about now is we've had 3 administrations, including the Obama administration, when looking at the Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention, which is the Ottawa Treaty, has said that would be bad for us from a strategic point of view, including this administration in 2009. Clinton administration actually said that those mines were an integral component of U.S. capability to deter and defend South Korea from North Korea. My question to you is, in your best professional military judgment, what advice could you give this committee about the military impact if we were to sign that treaty?
Summit Ottawa, the Convention on Landmines. I have rendered my military advice that I consider landmines, especially the ones that we have, anti-personnel landmines, in the way we have designed them, that is to say self-destruct. They can be set for 4 hours, 48 hours, or 15 days, and then they self-destruct. That I consider them to be an important tool in the arsenal of the armed forces of the United States.
And, Mr. Chairman, can you tell us whether or not there's been a military assessment that's been done at the Pentagon, any papers, white papers that have been written on the importance of those landmines or the impact this treaty would have if we were to sign it?
Yes, there have. And importantly, you point out the currency of the threat on the Korean Peninsula, and that's been factored in as well.
And could you share, either on a classified or unclassified basis with this committee, that paper so we can at least look at that assessment and what it would be?
I will take your request as an official request and respond accordingly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And one last question. Mr. Chairman, has anything changed between 2009 and today that would render our use of those mines any less important than it was in 2009?
My military judgment is actually the tensions on the peninsula have increased.
Good. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back and thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for your leadership. Mr. Hale, best wishes to you. Yesterday, in a hearing, we had basically an oversight roundtable discussion with Secretary Flournoy, with General Mattis, and Dr. Dale, and they all expressed concern over the absence of a kind of whole-of-government national strategy. Now, we know that I think we have a better whole-of-government approach among the agencies today, but when we talk about strategy, is there collaboration between the QDR and the QDDR, the State Department's Quadrennial Defense Review, and how can we work better with you all to really define a national strategy better that would inform the discussion that we're having right now?
Congresswoman, the QDR, as you know, prescribed by Congress, which is law, is a Department of Defense oriented assessment, strategic review, analysis, focused on our Department of Defense strategies. That does not disconnect from the rest of the so-called whole of government environment that we deal with too, but it is a prescribed DoD document. Now, the QDR aside, we meet all the time in deputies meetings, in the National Security Staff Agency at the White House, the principals, National Security Council, our people, State Department, intelligence agencies, Department of Energy, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Treasury. We have connecting areas of responsibility that overlap in the whole of government all the time. So that's something that it actually is becoming more and more a reality, if for no other reason than the kind of world that we live in.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a recognition of a better working relationship, surely, but I guess when we talk about national security and how that is reflected in what we're, as we move forward and with our budget, they're suggesting that they don't think it's there, and I think others have as well. So to the extent that we can improve upon that, might be helpful and might help us better define, whether it's resources and budget. I mean, what's the goal? And I think there seems to be a concern that perhaps at least this QDR doesn't reflect it as well as it should.
Okay.
Thank you. I also wanted to ask you about prioritizing the cuts to military personnel that were proposed in the President's budget. And I'm wondering what of those cuts, what would be simply non-negotiable and in an effort to protect our readiness? And in fact, how do we sort of set aside those non-negotiable discussions with keeping faith with our force, which we all, of course, feel very strongly about doing?
First, of course, we need a force structure that's capable of protecting this country, of fulfilling the missions that we ask our Department of Defense, specifically our services, to fulfill. So we are close, I think, to your question, to your point about non-negotiable, kind of bottom line here. And we've talked about this in the risks that we lay out on the continued budget restraints, resource restraints. We're talking about the Army 420,000. The reality of that may be the recommendation we make. That's getting us perilously, dangerously close to a line here that none of us want. There are lines, as I think you're implying here, in every service, all the platforms, that really violate the ability protect this country. And we lay those risks out in the QDR and in my statement and in connecting documents with the budget.
Thank you. And I certainly hope you would continue to do that. I think it was very clear, and I would encourage the kind of discussion that we had earlier about, what does it take? I mean, we know that the committee, for a number of reasons, has ignored
Gentle lady's time has expired. I'm going to have to watch this real close because we're going to be at a hard stop at 1:30 the next vote. So
Can I take 20 seconds, Mr. Chairman? I'll tell you what I think would be unacceptable if we continue to kick this can down the road, believing somehow that it'll be solved by our successors, when in fact, because we're kicking it down the road, not making the kind of tough decisions we need to make collaboratively, we're eating away at the nation's readiness for conflict, which does reduce our deterrent capability.
thank you, Mr. Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary General. Everyone has been thanking you for being here. I would like to say the same thing, except, to be honest, I can't find anything in this budget for which I am thankful. But General Dempsey, if I could ask you first, based on the nuclear posture review, the QDR, and even the new nuclear employment guidance, I'm under the assumption that perhaps the debate is over, that the administration, the chiefs, and you all agree now that maintaining the nuclear triad, because of its advantages for our defense as well as deterrence, is the approach, is definitely the approach. Am I correct in that assumption, for the record?
For the record, I can speak for myself and the Joint Chiefs, and you are correct.
Thank you. That's important. Can I ask Mr. Secretary, in this budget, our land-based ICBMs will start aging out in 2020, and I find nothing in this budget for the Air Force that will actually give a follow-on effort to sustain them. What does the administration plan to do, if anything, with what appears to be a widening gap between the U.S. and other nuclear nations in modernizing our nuclear capabilities, especially post-2020?
Well, it's not because we don't believe that it's necessary. It is an area that we have given considerable attention to. We will continue to do that. We focus this budget on where we thought our most significant priorities were as we, to your point, age out, and I have just recently visited some of those sites, and I was in Sandia here a couple of months ago. So very much aware.
So you're telling me there's not a specific plan right now?
They're not
Post-2020? There's not a specific
We
plan.
have not laid it out.
All right. Is it the assumption or the presentation of the Department of Defense that the A-10, retiring the A-10s, is a budget saver?
Yes.
Then isn't it true that if you are doing close air support missions, that the fighter platform is more expensive per hour than the A-10?
Well, I'm going to let you hear also from the chairman, but let me respond to that. There are many considerations that we had to give, and by the way, this was a recommendation by the Air Force and by a former A-10 pilot, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. I know he'll be up here, and you'll have an opportunity to ask him specifically that question. But the entire realm of consideration, when you talk about a vertical cutoff of a 40-year-old platform versus a more modern and versatile platform for our future, were all considerations, and it does factor in every dynamic of the question, but building to the future. I'll let the chairman add to that, too.
Yeah, Congressman, the A-10, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force is trying to reduce the number of platforms in his inventory. And every time you reduce a platform, you reduce the logistics tail and the infrastructure associated with it, which is a significant cost savings. There are many other platforms that can deliver close air support, and that's been the judgment of the Air Force, and I support it.
Thank you. You've answered the question in a roundabout way. Let me come up with another couple of things. Just simply, I'll make these quick questions if you give me quick answers. Is it the position of the department that moving the Apache combat aircraft from National Guard to the active force is a money saver? And have you done a cost-benefit analysis of it?
Yes.
You've done the cost-benefit analysis.
We have done that, but what's the whole point behind having an attack helicopter? That analysis as to the readiness and the use and where they are most effective, that was also a significant part of the decisions that we made.
All right, I'm on my yellow sign here, so I'm going to try and do these last two very quickly. We've talked, sometimes there's talk about a BRAC in absence of congressional reauthorization for the BRAC process. Does the administration intend to effectuate any kind of BRAC action independent of congressional action?
Well, first, we will follow the law. As you probably know, in Title 10, I think it's Section 2687, the Secretary does have some authorities in reorganizing different bases. We need a BRAC. We can't continue to carry overhead we don't need.
So the answer was you may do something without congressional reauthorization.
As I said, I'll follow the law, but I have authority now, Congressman.
I got 10 seconds, so I'll throw this out and ask for a written response some other time. Number one, I would like to find out in BRACs in the past how much of those lands that have been BRAC'd have actually gone into the private sector versus simply being given on to a taxpayer in another unit, as in the Park Service, et cetera. And I'll ask you about sequestration later because I'm out of time. Sorry.
Thank you. Mr. Langevin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Hagel, Chairman, and Mr. Hill, thank you for your service and wish you all the best as well. Mr. Secretary, if I could start with you, I wanted to focus first on cyber and cyber command. In January, 4 military officers from the 4 services, all fellows with the Center for a New American Security, drafted a report noting that in the cyber domain, and I quote, "The services risk building similar capabilities in different ways to conduct the same mission with significant duplication and overlap," end quote. Do you believe that the DoD is appropriately structured to avoid this concern, and what effect would the potential elevation of cybercom to the status of a functional combatant command might have on those concerns?
I do believe that we have a cyber oversight structure at the Pentagon that's appropriate with the right people, competent people. It's something that I pay a lot of attention to. Cyber Command is an integral part of our system, of our structure. Whether it should be a combatant command, I'll ask for a recommendation if that should come from the chairman and the Joint Chiefs. But right now I have confidence in the system and the structure we have regarding cyber. Thank you.
Congressman, I'm not concerned that we're building redundancy. Our task at building out our cyber forces is so significant that we of necessity have had to do it through the services. At some point in the future we might adapt, but for now I'm quite confident we're doing it the right way, to include what we need here for a national mission force and also to support combatant commanders. Secondly, on your question about whether it should be a unified command or a functional command, the greater good, in my view, our view, the Joint Chiefs, was to keep cybercom dual-hatted with the National Security Agency, and therefore we considered that to be more important and leave cybercom subordinate to Stratcom. I think we're in a pretty good place right now.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary, on those, and I will follow those. I'll continue to follow those closely. So thank you for your work on that. Mr. Secretary, the Quadrennial Defense Review released this week states that we will seek to sustain priority investments in science and technology, research and development, both within the defense sector and beyond. So with that, I'm certainly pleased to hear this emphasis, and I believe that we share the same commitments to future capabilities such as directed energy weapons, electromagnetic railguns, and advanced cyber and space-based capabilities that obviously would be so critical to our ability to project power in the future. However, I'm very concerned about the pressure that budget cuts right now are placing on our R&D priorities. And what I wanted to know is, and how, of course, that might affect the agility of our development system, the balance between service, lab, and industry-funded research, and whether it might cause the department to become increasingly risk-averse when it comes to new technologies. Could you speak to the health of our defense R&D ecosystem and what areas cause you concern?
First, the area of research and development, technology, science, the focus that the Pentagon has always put into that budget. It is a high priority. Will continue to be a high priority. Must be a high priority because it is there that really the laboratory of all these ideas has to begin. It's the incubator. It's how everything in life starts in technology. If we don't prioritize that, long term we run a big risk. And I don't think any of the leaders of the Pentagon, certainly not this Secretary of Defense, would jeopardize our security. So it is that way. So it is a priority. Will continue to be a priority. It is funded with, we think, an adequate budget. On other areas that bother me, and liabilities and risks, and it's the uncertainty part as much as anything else that we've been dealing with in our planning.
But we're not sacrificing future R&D right now because of the tight budget environment.
No. I mean, we can go through the specific programs as to where but I think I list those pretty well, where the risks are, what my concerns are.
Okay. Thank you.
R&D grows slightly in this budget, and anything that grows at all in this budget stands out.
Very good. Thank you all. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Klein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the witnesses being here today. To any of you, any of the three of you down there, did you, in the course of the Strategic Choices Management Review or budget preparation or any other analysis, did you ask for or generate plans to consolidate COCOM headquarters?
We have taken a look at the Unified Command Plan, the geographic combatant commands and the functionals, and our judgment at this point was that we needed to retain the current structure. However, they are subject to the 20% manpower reductions that the Secretary imposed last year.
Well, I appreciate the manpower reduction piece, but that doesn't really get at the heart of the issue from my perspective. We've built a lot of commands over time, and we were just talking about Cyber Command and co-locating it or dual-hatting it, I think is the correct phrase, with NSA. We created AFRICOM at a time of adequate financial resources, have a little difficulty finding a home for it. But it does seem to me that in times like these, when we're looking at sequestration and really tight budgets, that it would make sense to look at consolidating some of those four-star commands, those COCOMs. And so you've answered my question, and what I'd like to be able to get from you at some time is a look at what that planning is. I really, really think it is time, because we are not in a time of adequate financial resources. In fact, that's the whole gist of all of this discussion here today. Times are really, really tight, and yet we have quite a significant number of them. So I would ask for that information. If you can get that to me, that's an official request. Please get that to us. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the Secretary, to the General, and Mr. Hale, we will miss you. I hope this committee will not blame the Pentagon for obeying the law, because Congress made up the budget, and all of us would like it to be larger, more flexible, but this committee so far hasn't shown it's willing to do more than to blame the administration for budget cuts that Congress has passed. Last year's markup, we didn't even use the real budget numbers. We used the sequestration free numbers, the imaginary numbers, the fantasy numbers. It's almost like magical thinking. So I hope that this year will be more realistic and join with the Pentagon in trying to make the hard decisions that need to be made so that we can have maximum warfighting capability on whatever budget Congress comes up with. Because let me remind my colleagues, we could have a larger budget if we had the courage to vote for it. We could find savings in other places. We could have additional revenues. But that's what's lacking, is congressional courage. So let's not blame the witnesses. They're doing the best they can under very difficult circumstances. One of my colleagues asked questions about the BRAC earlier, the extent to which the Pentagon had flexibility to make base closing decisions on its own. BRAC is one of the most visible areas in which we in Congress have tied the Pentagon's hands, because there is surplus capacity in our defense establishment. Some of it Pentagon officials have been urging there be reductions for years, and yet in some cases we even prevent the study of such savings. That is truly amazing. So not only can we have whatever budgets that Congress is brave enough to pass, we can offer more flexibility to the Pentagon so that you can make maximum effective use of the dollars that you do have. And so often, for parochial interest, this committee refuses to allow you that freedom. That is wrong. So would the witnesses be kind enough to give me an estimate, a rough estimate, of the overall surplus capability that the Pentagon now has that could possibly be downsized, reduced, appropriately taken off our hands by a BRAC-type process?
We can provide that, Congressman, and appreciate your comments, and we will provide it. And, Mr. Chairman, we'd be very happy to provide it to you. We've got a bottom line number.
A bottom line number would be great for Mr. Hale, his valedictory comment. Yeah.
I think you're going to want probably some sense of how we arrived at that, too, which we'll provide.
Well, so we can't plan for BRAC, but if we go back to the studies we've done just before the last round, we knew we had about 25% infrastructure that didn't get eliminated in the last round. Of BRAC's probably higher now, but I agree with the Secretary. We'll give you a better number.
Well, I've heard the 25% number for years. That's a lot of surplus capacity. And just because it's located in someone's state or congressional district doesn't mean that should be immune from a sensible process of strengthening America's defenses. I've heard from defense contractors, as most of my colleagues have, that it's not so much the cuts they're worried about, it's the lack of flexibility in implementing the budget. So why don't we untie the hands of our own Pentagon so that you can be all that you can be, so you can be as effective as possible? That is really the responsibility of this committee and of the Armed Services Committee in the Senate. And we all can do better if we claim to be proponents of strong national defense, of allowing you the tools and the flexibility to have a strong national defense. We should not be the obstacle on this committee to having the Pentagon be capable of maximum effectiveness. So there are a number of issues that we could get into. I'm on the subcommittee that does strategic forces. Let me remind my colleagues that just to maintain our nuclear establishment, the triad, for example, that is so beloved, that is a $355 billion obligation in the coming years, according to CBO. $355 billion, just for what's considered an actually relatively small element of our Pentagon's finances. So we in Congress need to be preparing for those obligations to be met and fulfilled and possibly even exceeded. But this Congress so far does not have the ambition to do the job that I think most folks in our nation want to see this Congress do. So if you want to blame anybody, all this committee needs to do is look in the mirror. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Just to clarify the record a little bit, the President submitted a budget last year. We passed a budget in the House. The Armed Services Committee passed our National Defense Authorization Act in conformity with those numbers. You're right, they were monopoly numbers, but it was what the budget passed. We conformed with that. And at least this year, we do have a budget that's been accepted by the House and Senate and signed into law by the President, and that's what we'll be working to on our budget for this year. Mr. Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, Chairman Dempsey, good to see you. I greatly appreciate you guys being here, and under this really difficult environment, your questions are really important today. And the difficult environment that we have, obviously, is the budgetary environment, and also then the threat environment, especially in the light of what we've seen in Russia. As there's been some discussion about our nuclear deterrent, I just wanted to put some graphs up to frame some of my questions. The first is, there was previously a discussion, Mr. Secretary, I think you did an excellent job of talking about the issue of proliferation versus our own nuclear deterrent. You affirmed a strong commitment to a nuclear deterrent. I always want to make the point that nonproliferation is about the other guy. But there was a statement that the United States has the largest arsenal of nuclear weapons, and we all know that that's not the case. And I want to show this chart because it really illustrates it greatly. The chart is actually a reverse one, meaning the point in the middle is present as you're moving inward, where everybody was and where they're going to. This is the United States, and this is Russia. So we are not sitting on the largest nuclear weapons arsenal. Now, with respect to cuts and the issue of questions that you guys were all being asked, what we know that we need to do with our nuclear weapons, because I was looking at your QDR, and after you do the assessments of the top 6 things that we need to do militarily, it says that based on these 6 interests, the Joint Chiefs prioritize these missions. And the number 1 that was prioritized in the QTR was maintain a secure and effective nuclear deterrent. Number 1. And I think it's important because of what it's done to make certain that we have peace and stability. This chart is the one that shows the cliff that we're on with our current nuclear weapons, because everybody knows you buy one of these things, it's not like you're done. They decay, they decline, we have to maintain and modernize them. Every one of them have this cliff that's coming up, and so our need to invest is important. Here's the chart that shows the investment that DoD is currently on. You can see there's been a decline, and there's this uptick. Even if with this uptick, it's only going to be about 4% of overall DoD spending. So my question to you, Mr. Secretary, is recognizing your vast experience both in the Senate and also with the Atlantic Council, your relationship with Europe as being a strong proponent of the transatlantic alliance is one that is incredibly important as we see that now Russia has not felt deterred and has moved into Ukraine. We have the New York Times reporting that Russia perhaps has a new ground-launched cruise missile that perhaps violates INF. Clearly, everyone's looking for the United States to take action. Mr. Secretary, what do we need to do in this year's budgetary document and in our authorization document with respect to the QDR and your work to ensure that we respond to strengthen our relationship with Europe and deter Russia in the future?
Congressman, thank you. First, one of the points that I have continually made, and I think it's been reflected in our priorities at DOD, what the President has said, what Secretary of State Kerry is presently doing in Europe in trying to work through this Ukrainian crisis with our European partners, with our NATO partners. NATO's been meeting. I was in NATO last week for 2 days. The focus that we continue to put on missile defense in Europe. I was in Poland a few weeks ago, where, as you know, we'll be doing more with them, missile defense, Romania. The commitment that we've expressed clearly, completely, and again reflected in our budget, reflected, I think, in everything we are doing with our force posturing, with our relationships, using the European forums, our economic, diplomatic efforts. That commitment remains steadfast. I said it in Munich. I said it at NATO. And I think it's been, the message has been clearly given by the President on down in this administration.
Well, I appreciate your answer, and with Chairman Keane, I think one of the most important things that we need to do is to make certain that the administration's policies with respect to Russia reflect a change in this upcoming NDAA. The Washington Post just recently said that the foreign policy of this administration is based on fantasy, that fantasy being with respect to Russia. I think that we need to begin to signal that change, and that change needs to be in this NDAA. We certainly look forward to a dialogue as to the way both of you believe that we need to send that signal to Russia. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Bordallo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Secretary Hagel, General Dempsey, Mr. Hale. Thank you for your extraordinary service and your testimony this morning. I greatly appreciate the commitment to the rebalance in the fiscal year 2015 budget. I think there is more that our government can do to support it, but I'm very grateful for what they have done so far. Last year's defense authorization bill made important progress on the realignment of Marines from Okinawa to Guam, and I am grateful for that. The governor of Okinawa signing the landfill permit was a critical milestone and showed good faith from Japan to move forward. However, there are still restrictions in law on the obligation and expenditures of these funds. How important is it to remove these restrictions so that we can spend their funds? And do you hear from Japan about this matter? Mr. Secretary.
Obviously, Japan is a very key, important partner. We count on Japan, that relationship. We have a mutual defense treaty with Japan, working closely with the government of Japan and what they're doing, the TIPI-2 radar site, which they agreed on last year. As you note, the Futenma move and the landfill permit. So we'll continue to stay closely aligned with Japan as we see an Asia-Pacific expand, become more and more important to the world affairs, our economy, our relationships with our rebalance. That partnership will remain strong.
Would there be any way that we could lift these restrictions on this spending of these funds?
On Okinawa? Well, as you know, and as you've noted in your comments, we'll be moving and rotating Marines, rotating now in Australia, moving them to Guam, doing the things that you're well aware of. Again, I would say, and answer your question about restriction of funds or any area touching those funds, we've tried to balance the requirements that we think we need for our future, and especially as we stay committed to the Asia-Pacific.
Thank you. I have another question for you, Mr. Secretary. Can you comment on the importance of the National Guard State Partnership Program? I noted that the QDR talks about the importance of building capacity partnership. And the SPP program does just that, and I know our combatant commanders are very supportive of this. Are we looking to expand this program further in the Pacific and Africa Commands AOR?
Well, those relationships continue to be very strong. I'm going to ask the chairman if he'd like to respond to this. It will continue to be strong. It's been very effective, and we look forward to find ways to broaden and expand it. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
And we reflected the support of the program in the budget. And in fact, just this last week, there were 2 more nations entered into the state partnership program. Yeah, it's a very effective program.
Since I am the ranking member on Readiness Subcommittee, I wonder if you could just briefly, if not here because of the time situation, discuss the readiness consequences if the anticipated savings needed to fund improved readiness are not achieved in the coming year. What is the most serious risk if this should occur?
Well, as you know, Congressman, we submit a readiness report monthly, and it has reflected the fact that given not only the depth but the mechanism of sequestration, we've had no choice, literally no choice, but to go and raid our readiness accounts in order to find the money to achieve the depth of the reductions. And so we have about a 2 or 3 year significant readiness hole that we need to begin to fill back in. And it's one of the reasons I'm very supportive of the $26 billion ad, because in general terms, about 40% of that would go to readiness, about 40% to modernization, about 20% to sustainment, repair, and maintenance of facilities that are underinvested in right now in the current budget.
Thank you, General. And I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thanks for being here. As you know, I chair the Strategic Forces Subcommittee, and I'm very concerned about Russia's activities in violation of the INF Treaty. I know you've had 7 engagements with your Russian counterparts in the last year since you've become Defense Secretary. Could you share with the committee the message you've conveyed to him about our concerns over this INF Treaty?
Congressman, as you know, in these conversations, and you're correct, I have a very open line of communications with the Russian Minister of Defense, and I just spoke to him a few days ago. We talk about everything, of course. This specific subject is one that we have generally talked about, mainly when I talk with him, and we have a regular conference call, and then we talk when we're not just scheduled to talk, but when issues come up like Ukraine and so on. But because the State Department has the main, as you know, certification issue on this determination responsibility. We work with them. But this is a general area that I do discuss with him. Thank you.
How about NATO? I know you've met 3 times with NATO. Tell me about the concerns they've expressed and what we've done to reassure them that we're taking this seriously.
Well, I know, and I noted in my opening comments about some of the actions that NATO is taking now. We're taking, as I noted also, I was just at a 2-day NATO meeting in Brussels last week. We convened a NATO-Ukraine Commission meeting. At that meeting was then the acting Minister of Defense for Ukraine. As you know, NATO had a meeting yesterday with the NATO-Russian Commission. The NATO piece of this continues to be very important. We continue to stay closely aligned with and connected to NATO. I noted some actions that I've taken and directed yesterday regarding our partners in that area. So NATO remains a committed partner. We are committed to that relationship. We'll fully stay committed to that partnership because
Did NATO express to you concern that maybe we weren't as committed to it? And did they express any aggravation that we have known about these activities since 2008 and they just learned about them in January of this year?
No, they did not to me, and they have never, in all my official NATO forum meetings and my many bilateral NATO defense minister meetings, have ever expressed that kind of doubt to me about any of this. I know the chairman will want to say something too, but go ahead, please.
Do you share my view that they are in violation of the treaty, the INF treaty?
Well, again, I haven't seen all the documentation on it, and we're asking for that now. I'm asking for that, but that's the way I would answer it. We'd be very happy to come up here and give you a clear,
well, before we get to General
closed briefing on this too.
Okay, well, go ahead, General.
That report's not due till April, Congressman, on the potential violation, and it will have to be done in a very classified setting, as you well know. My NATO partners are concerned about that, but they're also concerned about Russia's intervention into Ukraine on the basis of ethnic discrimination, because, as you know, those borders in Eastern Europe, I mean, there are 400,000 ethnic Romanians living in Western Ukraine. So, you know, this would be a terrible precedent if this became a commonplace occurrence. That's what they're worried about.
And I don't blame them.
Yeah.
You know, this is their backyard. But, Mr. Secretary, I've got 3 questions that I would like for you to have responded to in writing. They deal with the manner in which we would deal with Russia about these deployed forces that are in violation of the treaty. First, when it comes to the Aegis weapon system, which is at the heart of the Aegis Ashore technology, it was designed in part to defeat cruise missiles. Would the sites in Poland and Romania add value to the defense of our allies and deployed forces? That's the first question. Second, we will have a 3rd Aegis Ashore battery in Hawaii at the conclusion of testing. What value would it have if it moved to the Pacific or the Baltic states to help defend our allies against Russia's INF violations? And finally, how much would it cost to rotate U.S. dual-capable aircraft to NATO allied states to help defend Europe from Russia's INF violation? If you'll have those in writing, I'd appreciate it.
We'll
Thank you,
respond.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Songas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for being here. You are making difficult choices, very challenging choices, and I don't envy you that, and I think we here in Congress have to be a part of that process as you move forward and try to find the best way to best protect our country. One of the things, and we've had some reference to it, is that you know, in the course of this, I think the military has to be well positioned to take advantage of technological advancements while being mindful of the economic realities that we face today. We all confront this in our daily lives. All our lives are changing as a result of those extraordinary advancements, and the military certainly is part of it. I happen to be from Massachusetts, a state whose ecosystem is focused on addressing these challenges, and we continue to invest in some of the best technological minds and resources that our country has to offer, and we serve as a willing and able partner to the military. We've heard Mr. Thornberry reference the acquisition process, and I think that the type of rapid technological innovation that the military is trying to take advantage of places great pressure on DoD's acquisition system, specifically in the realm of information technology and cyber. And it is in these realms where the ability to rapidly assess needs and field new technologies is critical. And DoD will increasingly need an acquisition system that works for IT and cyber. So just a comment that I hope as you're looking at all of this, you're paying particular attention to creating vehicles that enable you to be very responsive in real time to take advantage of emerging technologies and to better protect our country. And Secretary Hagel, I'm encouraged by your statement regarding the importance of research and development. The QDR strongly emphasizes the important role that QDR and innovation will play in our ability to meet future threats as well. But based on budget requests over the last 5 years, we have, as a country have been less inclined to put our money where our mouth is. In fact, partly due to congressional action, defense-related R&D has taken the deepest percentage cut during a downturn since World War II. So this is a big concern for me, despite your comments. I appreciate your comments. But we do know that these kinds of advances and this kind of investment does take money. So it's just a comment that we want to make this real, not just in words only. I do want to turn, though, to the issue of sexual assault. There are important votes taking place today in the Senate reflective of this body and the Senate's deep concern about the prevalence of sexual assault. You both have worked very hard with Congress to create more tools to fight sexual assault. We appreciate that. One of those tools is the creation of the Special Victims Counsel program, giving military victims of sexual assault an access to an attorney. We have mandated that the Air Force's Special Victims Counsel program be implemented by every service. We hear very encouraging stories about how many survivors are taking advantage of this and to real effect. But we do know that these tools only work if commanders and every service member under their command are aware that these tools exist. And we still do hear stories that there is not as broad an understanding of this as there should be. So, General Dempsey, could you tell me more about how you are making sure that service members are aware of the resources available of them to fight sexual assault? How are we making sure that every officer and enlisted member knows about these tools?
Three things briefly. One is we're currently under a mandated one-year review that was directed by the President of the United States. So this has the interest of the Commander-in-Chief. We're also working with the guidance of the Secretary of Defense, 21 initiatives. And then internally, as a JCS, we're meeting to establish our own initiatives and to make sure we've got the metrics right, make sure we got the media, meaning social media, which is where these kids normally dwell these days. We've got the right information mechanisms to do that. And just to assure you of that, I was in Ramstein Air Base on the way back from Afghanistan and asked to meet with one of the Air Force's special victims counselors so she could tell me what her scope is, how she feels about her ability to reach out to folks. She was actually quite content, I suppose, that the information is available and that she had access and she had the authority she needed to perform her duties. But, look, we just got to keep at it.
Gentlelady's time expired. Mr. Franks.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here. General Dempsey, thank you for your magnificent service to the country and to the cause of human freedom. And Mr. Hale, thank you for your service to this committee, and I wish you the best in the future. And Mr. Secretary, thank you for your service to the country and this administration. I'll start with you if I could, and let me first ask you for diplomatic immunity here. I constantly find myself shaking my head at the decisions and actions of this president, but it seems the greatest consistency that he's had is in the perpetration of one foreign policy and national security debacle after another. The administration has now ensconced Iran in a protocol that's really protected, allowing them to enrich uranium indefinitely, all the while that they are modernizing their missile defense or their missile capability faster than ever before. And I don't know of any credible voice, Mr. Secretary, anywhere who would deny that we now live in a world where the modernization and proliferation of ballistic missiles is not at an all-time high, or is it an all-time high? I don't know anyone that would deny that. So, yet today, the President of the United States and the Secretary of Defense presents this committee with the lowest budget for the Missile Defense Agency ever presented by this President in the 5 years of his presidency. And I guess my question very simply is the lowest budget for missile defense in the last 5 years the best way that you, sir, know how to show a strong and continued commitment to homeland and NATO missile defenses? And is this the best way to protect the American people and our allies?
Congressman, ballistic missile defense is a priority. I announced last year that we were increasing our missile interceptors by 14, building 44 we would have total.
Forgive me, sir, that's after this administration canceled them previously, but please proceed.
Well, all I can answer for is,
yes, sir,
since I've been here and what I've done, and you asked, I think,
yes,
partly the question directed at me, and so I can only account for my actions as Secretary of Defense, and that's first. Second, I think I've been very clear, and I think the Secretary of Defense before me, Secretary Panetta, and before him, the importance of missile defense. I think other ways we have shown the importance of that is continuing our missile defense system in Europe with our European partners. As I noted, I was just in Poland. I just noted to the Congresswoman that in relationship to our partnership with the Japanese, the TIPI-2 radar sites, as this is a global issue in defense of our country, we, as you know, we need those sites, the Aegis missile defense capacity as we station it, posture it, position it, working with allies, continues to be a priority.
Well, let me shift gears on you here.
We're pretty clear on this.
Well, I don't think the budget represents that. I don't think that it indicates that. But in any case, I'll move on to a different question. As you know, we're on a path to reducing our strategic nuclear deterrence in accordance with the New START treaty, which really reduced American capability far more than it did Russia's. And now, according to the QDR that you just released, the United States would be, quote, the United States would be prepared to reduce ceilings on deployed strategic warheads by as much as an additional 1/3 below New START levels. Now, Mr. Secretary, I've got to tell you, it's a trajectory that frightens me, because it seems a strategy designed by those who live in a world of grand vision rather than one of the world of the one that we live in. And I guess I first ask you, do you put your full faith in Russia actually complying with another round of reductions, and do you feel that this will make the United States safer 20 years from now?
My first answer would be, as I have given more than once on more than one occasion, the President Reagan comment about trust but verify. That's why we have verification built into all of our treaties. And that's the only thing that works in any way. As to the New START treaty, we are complying with the requirements of the New START treaty. That is law. As you know, the United States Senate, after the President submitted it, it ratified that treaty. As has been noted, there would be no unilateral actions taken by this administration on going below the current levels. Those would have to all be, as we have done in every administration, negotiated through treaties.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Spear.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. To Chairman Dempsey, Secretary Hagel, and Mr. Hale, thank you all for your extraordinary leadership. Let me say to Secretary Hagel and Chairman Dempsey that in my conversations with you privately, you have both shown to have a great deal of commitment to address the issue of sexual assault and rape in the military. And I believe you. But I must tell you, I have grave reservations about those in positions of authority right under you that are not necessarily taking your direction seriously. Over a year ago, Vice Chair Winfield convened a meeting at the Pentagon in which members of the House and Senate were invited, and many generals sat around a very large table to discuss this issue. It was a good meeting, and the Vice Chair had indicated at that time that there would be more. That was over a year ago. There has never been another meeting. There was an email in March of 2011 by a brigadier general after meeting with a congresswoman in which he apologized for emailing it late because he had masturbated 3 times over the past 2 hours after meeting with the congresswoman. That was in an email, an official email to one of his superiors or many more, and nothing happened. And it was only until that email was exposed in another sexual abuse case that there was any punishment leveled. And I question what the punishment is when, in fact, this general is now working for you, General Dempsey, in the Joint Staff. I met yesterday with General Snow, the newest SAPRO director. And what he said to me was, when he was given the post, his superior said to him, "You know, I know this isn't on your bucket list." This is not some, take one for the team position. And yet, we have had 4 SAPRO directors in the last 4 or 5 years. And they're only 18-month stints. So if they're only 18-month stints and you bring someone in who has no expertise, no background, what is our expectation about how seriously we're really taking these cases? Now, let me start with you, Secretary Hagel. You ordered a directive.
Could I respond?
Yes, certainly.
Would it be
you can.
appropriate? First of all, just because you haven't been invited to a meeting, Congresswoman, please don't assume that there haven't been other meetings. I mean, I mentioned earlier I've had many sessions with the Joint Chiefs.
No, I meant with members of Congress. It was one that
sure.
was going to
No, I understand, and I
will
go back and research why we haven't invited you back. But there's been plenty of meetings. Secondly, on that young man who you cite, that's a part of an ongoing investigation and action that I simply can't talk about because of the ongoing investigation. And to your third point about the bucket list comment, I'm the one that made that. Now, let me tell you why I made it. I wanted to get his reaction. I wanted to see if he was going to take this job with the fervor and commitment that I wanted. And if he had said, yeah, you're right, General, this is not on my bucket list, he wouldn't have been hired. I'm the one that said that.
All right, Secretary Hagel, you asked that all the services rescreen all soldiers who were in, quote, positions of trust, including sexual assault counselors, recruiters, and drill sergeants. The Army disqualified 585 soldiers as counselors, recruiters, or drill sergeants because they discovered infractions of sexual assault, child abuse, or drunk driving. The Navy only dropped 3 recruiters and 2 counselors. The Air Force dropped 0, and the Marine Corps dropped 0. Now, my question is, first of all, this was not going to be made public except for the fact that it was leaked to a reporter, and that's how it became public to members of Congress. The disparity of having 588 in the Army who were disqualified, 0 in the Air Force, 0 in the Marine Corps, and only 5 in the Navy suggests that they're using different means by which to do the screening. As I understand it, in some cases, all they did was determine whether or not they were on a civilian sexual predator registry. So I guess my question to you is, are you going to reissue another directive? Are you going to ask the Air Force and the Marine Corps to go back and scrub like the Army did? And will you make it public?
Would you please respond for the record? Gentlelady's time has expired.
I will.
Mr. Lamborn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Hagel, General Dempsey, and Mr. Hale, thank you for your service. I have communicated with officials from Israeli Missile Defense Forces they say that Israel would much better be able to meet its security needs if that part of the Obama budget were increased by $350 million. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to put into the record documents received from the Israeli Missile Defense Organization asking for additional funding in this budget.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Secretary Hagel and General Dempsey, the outcome of the Obama administration's attempts to negotiate a verifiable end to Iran's program to produce a nuclear weapon is still up in the air. However, apart from that, Iran continues to support terrorism and instability around the world. It is proven that they supplied the explosives and weapons to kill hundreds of our soldiers and Marines in Iraq, and they are continuing programs to develop ballistic missiles and other weapons of mass destruction. Should companies that do business with the Department of Defense also be doing business with Iran?
Congressman, we have sanctions in place, as you know, to address that. And companies would violate those sanctions if they were doing that kind of business with Iran. I might also add, if I might, Congressman, on the missile defense with Israel, I probably speak as much with the defense minister of Israel, General Yalon, as any one defense minister. And the commitments that we've made to the missile defense systems in Israel remain very clear. They're in the budget, Iron Dome, David Sling. So I'd like to have more money, too, in my budget. But I don't think there's any equivocation or question about our commitment to those systems.
Well, I appreciate what has been done. I'm just thinking this is something we should give more attention to, and we'll continue those discussions in committee here. And on the sanctions issue, one news report has indicated that companies doing business with the Department of Defense to the tune of $100 billion are looking at doing more business with Tehran now that the sort of floodgates have been opened. And some people would disagree with that term, floodgates, since this recent deal with Iran, but that's how some people out there in the business world are looking at it.
Well, as you have noted, regarding floodgates, no floodgates have been opened. We still keep our strong sanctions on Iran. No deal has been made with Iran. What is in place is, and it's clicking down, that 60 or 6-month process to build, if we can, a framework of engagement with the Iranians in our National Security Council countries and ours to get to what we want to get to, and that is to assure that Iran doesn't get nuclear weapons. The other issues that you mentioned, which we're quite mindful of, and as I've said many times, others have said in this administration, including the President, they're a state sponsor of terrorism. So we have to deal with that as well. But there's no opening of floodgates. The sanctions are still there.
Okay. Thank you for that answer. And also, Secretary Hagel, given the Russian push into the Ukraine, the uncertainty involving Iran, we just touched on, continuing instability in North Korea, Chinese expansion, the loss of almost 2 million documents through Edward Snowden's treachery, potential cyber attacks from shadowy players. Were it not for budget constraints, would you be advocating for the reductions that are in this budget?
I wouldn't be advocating for the reductions in the budget at all. Reposturing, resetting, based on coming out of, as I said, 2 of America's longest wars, one of them America's longest war. We've always done that. New threats, and you just presented an inventory of many of those, starting with cyber. We need to restructure, reposture, regardless of the resources.
Well, I'm just wondering when the concentration is on the mission versus the budget, and which comes first. And
well, the strategy and the mission has to come first, but I don't think, other than you're interested in a college paper, a seminar project, If you can't implement the strategy, and if it's not resource facilitated, not driven, a business plan that our chairman has probably put together many of them. I've done so. Many of you on this committee have over the years. I never put together a business plan or a strategy unless I didn't think how was I going to implement that and how was I going to carry that out. So it's the strategy, the mission, the responsibilities, of course, and then you build out, but you still have to connect the resources to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to, before I begin my questions, I want to join with my colleagues in thanking you, Mr. Hale, for your service to this country, for your integrity and hard work. We will miss you, and we wish you well. Mr. Secretary and Mr. Chairman, I really appreciate the challenges that you faced in developing a budget under the sequestration requirements. I think we all understand that that's almost an impossible task. There's no question that we have to reduce our debt and deficit, but I share the view of many in this committee and in the Congress that sequestration is absolutely the wrong way to do it, and I believe it seriously is compromising our national security. Mr. Chairman Dempsey, let me pose my first question to you, but I'll preface it by talking a little bit about my district and the men and women of the Air Force and the Army who serve our country there. I'm very proud to represent Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, where I grew up as a kid, home to the 355th Fighter Wing, where the A-10 operates and is training the next generation of close air support pilots. I also represent the Army Garrison at Fort Huachuca, and I've adopted the 162nd Air National Guard Fighter Wing of the Air National Guard just across my district line. And I would hope, Mr. Secretary, Mr. Chairman, that you could come and visit our district and meet the men and women who are serving this country so courageously. I hope you can come when the weather is cooler than it is here, but not as cold as it is now. It'll be good to come in the spring or the fall. These military installations have long and distinguished history of defending the nation. And the budget proposal you put forward last week, calls for the divestment of the A-10. Mr. Chairman, I understand the need to find budget savings. However, the A-10, I think we all know, plays a crucial role in protecting our service members on the ground, a role that simply cannot be suitably replicated in all aspects by any other aircraft in our inventory at this time. I'm a supporter of the F-35. I'm a supporter of UAVs. I believe that other airframes can perform aspects of close air support, but none can take the place and perform like the A-10. Just yesterday in this hearing room, Admiral Locklear said there are capabilities out there that will not parallel what the A-10 can offer. General Austin in the same hearing said that he has seen the A-10s perform magnificently in Iraq and Afghanistan. And previously, Major General Bill Hicks made the crucial point that the A-10 serves as a flying artillery when ground troops cannot be request indirect fire support due to logistical issues. And just 7 months ago, in this hearing room as well, General Welsh told me, quote, until the Air Force has sufficient numbers of F-35s, the Air Force intends to keep the A-10 viable and combat ready. And Mr. Chairman, from an Army officer's perspective who's commanded ground troops, how is it possible that it's not in our nation's best interest to keep this proven workhorse flying? And I would ask Mr. Secretary, since we're getting close to time, to ask the same question of you. We, I believe, are making a grave mistake in divesting ourselves of the A-10 when it is performed so magnificently, and there's no other airframe that can do the job it's done. Mr. Chairman Dempsey and Mr. Secretary.
Yeah, and I'll make this brief, Congressman. The A-10 is a wonderful system, but it's also an old system, and it's also vulnerable in a high-intensity environment in a way that it's not vulnerable today in Iraq and Afghanistan. The Air Force has other platforms that can produce that flying artillery you described. So does the Army, called the Apache helicopter. It's a prudent budget decision made in the face of significant cuts. If we had the money we thought we'd have, in 2010, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation. But we're having this conversation.
Congressman, the only thing I would add is this was a recommendation that the Air Force made to me. General Welch, you know, he's a former A-10 pilot. It's not a matter of was it a platform that wasn't everything you said it was, but General Dempsey just laid out the realities of a 40-year platform when we're looking down the road at the kind of requirements we're going to need in the future with the restraints we have.
Let me just add, I've got 4 seconds. We've put $1.1 billion into upgrading this aircraft. It's given it 15 to 20 more years. We need to keep it flying. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Whitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Dempsey, Secretary Hagel, Mr. Hale, thank you all so much for your service to our nation. Thanks for joining us today. Secretary Hagel, let me begin with this. You've spoken very eloquently about the increased risk around the world that we face, the threats that are out there. You've heard members here speak about the specifics of those threats. I want to look in a little broader perspective as you have identified those threats. In looking at the budget that you've projected going forward, I am curious as to how you feel that budget, in the face of those threats, relates to, in any way, shape, or form, there being an increased risk to the men and women that serve this nation if they are placed in a conflict. And then secondly, under this budget scenario, is there any possibility that there's an increased situation where we may not win in a conflict? I think those are two things that are very, very concerning to me. I want to get your perspective on that. Again, any increased risk to the men and women in harm's way, and any increased possibility that we may lose in a conflict that we might become engaged in.
Congressman, thank you. Your first question, the increased risk to the men and women in uniform that we would have sent into harm's way. I don't know if you were here in a couple of my opening comments on this specific issue, so I won't replow that same ground. But as you said, and in way of your question, and as I noted in my statement, how we take care of our men and women isn't just compensation. Yes, that's a big part of it, but it's, to your point, making certain, no question, that they are prepared in every way. That has been a priority, will continue to be a priority. Anytime you take cuts, the size that we're taking and the steep, abrupt cuts that we're taking, there's going to be risk. I mean, look at the Army last year and the Marines, for example, and ground troops. What the Army in particular had to do to stand down much of their training, well, that cuts right into readiness, and that cuts right the risk. That's just but one element. But the budget we propose over the next 5 years, we think addresses that. The chairman will give his opinion on this, but this was not without the chiefs, with our senior enlisted, without the complete integration and involvement of our uniformed military. On the larger, the second question was the risk on.
Well, is there any increased possibility that in a conflict we might lose?
First, the world is uncertain. I can't guarantee the outcome of anything. But what we're trying to do, as I said in the strategic guidance that the President gave us in 2012, what our QDR was based on, what our focus is based on, is winning wars. And I noted that. The world is unpredictable, but we want to be prepared to win a war. And that's the kind of budget that we have presented. That's the focus. That's our priority.
Very good. Chairman Dempsey, I'm going to get your perspective, but I want also, if you would, to drill down a little bit and give us the perspective, too, on the challenges with the Army that it now is having to face a decreased capacity and end strength and a decreased capability as far as less modernization. And what does that mean for them and having to carry out O plans and con plans that they're going to be faced with? If you could obviously answer the general question, but then drill down a little bit as to the Army perspective.
Yeah, what I'll do is just give you, I'll react to your question, but actually I'd like to take for the record the opportunity to answer. This is a very profound question. This is the question we've been struggling with for 3 years, frankly. But I'll tell you this, in 2020 we will still be the most powerful nation in the world if we achieve the promises in the QDR. And the promises in the QDR actually involve institutional reform, flexibility so that we can take the money that the country has decided to invest in us and use it to keep the force in balance. If we can do that, then in 2020 I have confidence in telling you we'll still be the most powerful nation in the world with over 1 million men and women in uniform. Oh, then that's not counting the Guard and Reserve. It'll be up around 2 million, with the strongest system of alliances, a global network of forward operating bases and allies and partners, control of the global commons, but not unchallenged and not at times at risk. But let me answer that question more fully for the record.
Sure. Very good.
Gentlemen, time
Thanks, Jim.
expired. Thank you, Mr. Kilmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you each for being here. Mr. Secretary, I wanted to start by asking about the role of the reserve component in the National Guard. Would you agree that there are some missions that are best suited for the active component and others that are best suited for the reserve component? And additionally, would you agree that despite who takes the leadership in a given role, both the active and reserve components should be equally capable of providing forces for all mission sets?
First, thank you, Congressman. First, as I said, and I said in my opening statement, I've said, all the chiefs have said, it's reflected in the budget. The active Army is integrated into, or the other way around, National Guard Reserve integrated into the active in the sense that it is part of our complete national security enterprise and our military. They are vital, the National Guard and Reserve, to that system, and they will be. That's first. Second, the National Guard has different responsibilities, reserves do, than the active duty. The active duty is there for one reason. That's active duty. They've got to be prepared, agile, immediate. They've got to have the equipment, the training, everything that sets them up for that mission and to accomplish that mission. National Guard reserves aren't the same, but they integrate. They work together. The reserves, National Guard work in Afghanistan and Iraq. Very important. But that also includes the training and the preparation and the movement and logistics that go with being able to move your combat brigades and all the things that go into that. That also gets us into the aviation piece of that. What do the governors need in order to use the National Guard to fulfill their requirements, as well as keeping the National Guard and Reserves ready and so on? We've tried to focus on that balance as we go forward on requirements that we know we're going to have, threats that are out there, and that's the kind of strategic guidance that we use to prepare the budget.
Thank you. With the time I have remaining, I wanted to ask also about, after reviewing the budget and reflecting on the rebalance toward Asia, I'm concerned and hearing concern about the reduction to the Navy ship depot maintenance budget of $1.4 billion, and there's an operations cut in that regard as well. I remember the old Fram oil filter, pay me now or pay later. Does this set us up for more costly bills down the road if we use our ships more and can't repair them? Wouldn't we then have to move up our plans to replace some of these tired vessels to ensure our overall capacity?
Well, Congressman, I think that gets to the point of what the Navy has recommended in some of the, I think, pretty creative ideas they've got in being able to bring some of our ships out and upgrade them and overhaul them, not taking them out of the fleet, but bringing more capacity, longer life span. I mean, all these things are part of addressing your question. This also, within the framework of the budget restraints we have, the resource restraints.
Thank you. And I may just ask for the answer in follow-up. Mr. Hale, I'm encouraged by the serious look that's taking place on acquisition reform. I wanted to get your sense of what needs to be done to properly address this issue. I'm sure that that both policy and process are factors in this. I wanted to get a sense of what you think the biggest factors are in that regard.
Well, I think I'm going to let Frank Kendall answer that one for the record primarily, but I'll say we're pursuing a variety of initiatives, as I think you're aware, greater use of competition, increasing our tradecraft and services contracting, because we spend so much on that and we think we can do better. We've seen some tangible results, like less funding or less cost for the EELV contract. So I think we're on the way. It deserves more work, and it will get it, and I'm going to let him expand on that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. We now proceed to Congressman Dr. John Fleming of Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank our panel of witnesses today. Thank you for your service to our nation. I want to change the subject a little bit here. Secretary Hagel, in January, the DOD published a revised instruction that was in response to the religious liberty language, including in both the FY13 and FY14 NDAA. However, the directive failed in a number of ways to address the concerns of members of Congress, which I noted in a letter sent to you this week. It was March 4th. You probably haven't had a chance to review it yet. Mr. Secretary, can you explain how the Department intends to ensure that protection is provided for a service member's freedom to discuss, explain, mention, and reference their specific faith tenets either in private or in public while completing an official military duty? And just to mention here also, the directive does specifically but very narrowly address such things as attire, jewelry, headwear, so forth, but it seems to ignore the really important parts of this, which is, again, the freedom to discuss, explain, mention, and reference their specific faith tenets.
You note, Congressman, the memo, the standard that we have published to bring a service-wide standard to acknowledge religious freedom, expression of that, but at the same time not proselytizing.
Yes.
And there is a difference. We tried to give some framework of standards across all the services. You mentioned specifically headwear, some of the specific areas that are always close calls. The good order and discipline of our system has to be maintained. We've given the local commanders the call on their judgment, depending on the mission. We're not trying to inhibit anyone's freedoms to express themselves, praying 5 times a day, but it can't interfere with the mission of the military either. It has to maintain the good order and discipline of the military. So the local commander is an important last arbiter in this. Each command, each situation is a little different. We try to build in flexibility to that. But, for example, no member of the clergy is told to, is expected to, should, is forced to do something that would be against his or her religion. So we've tried to give a standard, but also some flexibility.
Well, Mr. Secretary, I mean, for instance, we get reports that members somehow are disciplined or told to remove a Bible that's on their desk. In one case, there was some prose written by, I think, a chaplain having to do with the old standard, there's no such thing as an atheist in a foxhole. We hear about prayers that have to receive some sort of scrutiny by command, the word Jesus removed. And so what I'm saying is it doesn't appear, at least thus far, that the directives have addressed this at all. Again, it's jewelry, it's cosmetic things, which I think
does not address what we put in the NDAA, both in FY13 and 14.
First of all, I'm not aware of the specific issues, and I'd be glad to look into them if you want.
They're all outlined in a clear and present danger through the Family Research Council, so I'll be happy to upload that to you.
But to your bigger question and answer, local commanders have authority and responsibility to make those kind of calls based on what they think is appropriate for their command. Again, we've tried to give them some overall guidance for all our services, but I'd be glad to look at the specifics of this.
Well, I guess a good start would be the letter that we sent you, which of course you haven't had.
I have not seen it yet, but
yes, sir, it's
I will
March
respond.
4th.
I'll look at it and respond.
So I think that would be a good start on this. We've already had one hearing. I think we plan for another one soon. In fact, Mr. Wilson is a subcommittee chairman of that committee, so we would like to delve in this further.
I'll respond to you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. I have some significant concerns. You know, after a year of various representatives from DOD testifying to your commitment to maintaining the National Guard as an operational force, I am concerned that the proposals as opposed pertaining to the Guard aviation really does change the fundamental nature of that. By taking away the AH-64s, by taking away the Apaches, you've basically gotten rid of the combat aviation brigades in the Guard, so that instead of having combat aviation brigades, you now have combat support, aviation support brigades. Does that not change the fundamental nature of the divisions, the Guard divisions, and how they can go into the fight?
If I might, I'm going to ask the chairman to respond to this. Because the chairman, with his experience to begin with, has something to say about this. But more to the point, he and the chiefs, in particular the Army chief, and by the way, the National Guard chief, General Frank Grass, who was involved in all of this, and as you know, has a voice at the table with the other chiefs, and he's an important voice in all of this. And we listened carefully, obviously, to what General Grass's viewpoints were. And I want you to know, first of all, before I ask the chairman to respond, is that we took a very clear look at all of this, what we're going to need for the future roles of the Guard, reserve, active, how we bring value added to all of that as we must for the future. So if I might, I'll ask the chairman to respond to that.
Just before you respond, General Dempsey, just real quickly, I understand that both General Grass and of course, the Army chief himself had input into this. I do find myself somewhat skeptical when I hear the Army chief talking about how National Guard troops and reserve troops only train 39 days a year, when we all know darn well that most of them do certainly more than that, and I certainly did more than that as an aviator, and I think that that was either a careless statement or a statement meant to deceive. So I do have some skepticism when it comes to the Army chief's desire to not cannibalize the Guard in order to maintain his force. With that, General Dempsey?
General, may I just respond quickly? I'm well aware of the comment. I'm well aware of your concerns. I'm also well aware of your distinguished service as an aviator. So I do know that you know exactly what you're talking about on this issue. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And in the limited time available, but I'm sure this will be a longer conversation as this evolves. But the Army's motivation in moving, particularly the Apache around, is they're trying to move from 7 airframes to 4. I think you probably know that.
Right. I don't have a dog in this hunt because there's no
Right.
Apaches in Illinois, so
Right.
it's not a fight that I'm in. But my question is, what does this do to the fundamental nature of the divisions in the Guard as opposed to the active duty divisions if you take away the cabs out of the Guard divisions?
You correctly point out that the aviation the combat aviation aspect of the Guard division will be fundamentally altered. But I do think in terms of them remaining operational and having the other, I don't know, 12 or 15 systems that define combat capable, in some ways it'll make us more interdependent, frankly, the Guard, the active, and the reserve component. That's where I think we're headed, by the way, more interdependence as opposed to interoperability. And by the way, the Air Force is probably ahead of us in that ahead of the Army in that regard.
I only have a minute left. I will take your answer for the record. I'd like to know what analysis you did into the active duty taking over of equipment that was purchased with NAGURA funding, specifically the 72s, the Lakotas, that many of them were bought with 2012 NAGURA fundings. That is funding that's provided by Congress directly to the Guard and to the Reserve to purchase equipment for a dual-use function, both combat and domestic. If there is any analysis that you did on whether or not you can actually do that. Thank you.
Yeah, we will, Congressman. By the way, I'm reminded that it's very challenging to have a conversation with a helicopter pilot about Army aviation.
Thank you, Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Dempsey, thank you for your service as the Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff and Secretary Hagel as Secretary of Defense. And thank you both for your service in the United States Army as combat veterans. The previous National Defense Authorization Act authorized the National Commission on the Structure of the Air Force. And I've got the report here, and it was issued on January 30th. To the Congress, and it's very impressive. And I think one of the theses of this report is that in order to save money without compromising capability, that we need to push more capability. We need to look at the force structure, and in this report it looks at the United States Air Force and says, what can we do in the Guard and Reserve versus what can we do on active duty in terms of saving money? Because your predecessor, Secretary of Defense Robert Gates, would tell us in these hearings that the trajectory of personnel cost is going to eat into acquisition costs, irrespective of what else happens to the budget. And so we now have, I think, I'm co-sponsoring an amendment by Chairman Wilson, South Carolina, a personnel subcommittee that would do the same, set up the same process for the United States Army in terms of looking at its force structure and what can be done in the Guard and Reserve. I'm doing writing amendments to do the same for the United States Marine Corps and the Navy. And so I'm wondering where you see this going, because I really think that this is, having served in both the Army and the Marine Corps and in both their reserve components, I mean, I really think that that we can rely on the Guard and Reserve more than we do, albeit I think we have to, we don't want to go back as they transition from an operational reserve to a strategic reserve. We got to make sure that I think we address their training requirements, and we don't want to go back to the status quo ante when reserve units are showing up or Guard units are showing up for the first Gulf War and we're ill prepared to go to combat. General Dempsey, I wonder if you could address it.
Yeah, absolutely. You're not going to find a bigger fan of the Guard and Reserve than me, having served 3 years in Iraq almost consecutively. But I also, as we continue to do this analysis, and I think the Army, I'm not sure whether we need a study or not, frankly. It would depend on how it was, what charter you gave it and what composition you would direct. But let me set that aside for a minute. If you want someone to be ready and as capable as someone who is active, then you have to pay for them to achieve that level of readiness. This really isn't magic. So if you want a Guard that is ready tonight, it's going to cost you the same, precisely the same, as it'll cost you to have an active duty. The issue for us is, again, that word keeps coming back, balance. And we are eager to have that conversation. We're not trying to direct it in any one particular direction. We think we've got in the Army's plan the proper balance. If someone suggests otherwise, then let's have that conversation.
Sure, we will have that conversation, in what you just mentioned doesn't take into account the legacy cost, where a an active duty soldier, maybe with 20 years, retires at age, say, 40, 42, is going to withdraw 50% of their base pay from the date of retirement, whereas that reservist with the 20 years is not going to draw till age 60. There is significant legacy cost differences. Mr. Secretary, do you have any comments on this?
I think the Chairman laid it out pretty clearly, and I would just add one thing he said. We're not trying to push anybody aside here. We would welcome the input and the ideas, and just as Chairman Dempsey said.
Well, I think we're clearly going to look at how we structure this. I think these findings are impressive in this report. I've written the 4 recommendations in amendment form that I'm going to try and put into the National Defense Authorization Act that will produce savings, and we're going to take the same process to all the other branches of service. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
If I could, Mr. Chairman, I just want to ensure, I don't know that I don't know this, but I suspect the Air Force hasn't had time to not rebut it, but comment upon it and present their alternative view. And I'd hate to have the recommendations in that review be placed into the NDA in the NDAA in a binding fashion before we have this debate.
Mr. Chairman, very quickly, in accordance to this report, the Air Force fully participated in it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen, for your time today and for your service to our country, particularly to Mr. Hale. Congratulations, and we wish you good luck. I wanted to draw your attention, if I could, with my time, to the $20 billion or so we spend every year on energy in the department, and to raise a little comment about, in response to something I heard about what happened at yesterday's Senate Armed Services Committee, where some of the folks attacked the Navy's investment in biofuels, including algae and alternative energy resources. For my part, I wanted to just encourage you that I agree with you that the investments are designed to enhance operational security and that reducing the reliance on conventional fuels and improving the energy efficiency of our operations and installations has both strategic and tactical benefits, but also promotes cost savings, which is important for us to support your mission as well, in terms of equipping our soldiers and our warfighters and our bases. So I want to commend the department for the services and all the work they do and have continued to do to promote energy security and efficiency. And I know there's a lot more work to do, but I just wanted to thank you in particular, Mr. Secretary, for signing the letter to Senator Mikulski dated January 2nd with Secretary Vilsack and Secretary Moniz. I appreciate that. My question on this was to sort of maybe you could give us an update on the latest initiatives to integrate energy considerations into planning and force development activities, and then maybe give us some sense of how we can be helpful here at Congress in supporting that effort.
Thank you, Congressman. You know we have an Office of Energy Resources Development and Assistant Secretary, and you deal with her, I'm sure, and know her well. Starting with your number that we're in the area of about $20 billion roughly of what we expend DOD on fuel and what it takes to propel this large enterprise. And we are constantly working inside with others outside as we develop research and finding ways to, yes, get cheaper, more effective, more efficient ways of producing energy, but secure energy. And we've, I think over the last 10 years, done a lot of interesting things. I mean, you know about the third-party private sector investments on some of our bases where we get first priority that energy. It's much cheaper, it's secure, it's there. But also, as you know well, we're all over the world. Ships, planes, bases. So it's not just North America. We've got to rely on secure energy sources everywhere in the world. So we are constantly working to improve that and find new ways to do it, and we'll continue to do that.
If I could add from the military JCS perspective, what we're most I mean, look, we're interested in becoming more efficient, saving money, and so forth. But there are, if you're looking for where you can be helpful, operational energy. So, for example, a U.S. Army or a Marine Corps infantry platoon probably carries about 400 pounds of batteries in order to power all the devices that we've given them over time. To the extent that we can invest in and find ways to either improve the batteries or somehow replace them, then we become more combat effective, and that's what we're interested in.
I appreciate that. I always recount the story of my first visit from the commandant of the Marines when, as a member of this committee, he sat down with a whole group of top-level Marine Corps officers, and the thing he wanted to talk to me was about solar energy, and not because he's a tree hugger, but because in terms of in the battlefield, it's become so useful, and of course, that's what this committee is about. So we want to be helpful and supportive, and also I know that there's a lot of new smart grid technologies that help you out in the field remain independent from electric grids that might not be the most friendly in terms of our relationship with those countries. So I appreciate what you're doing. Thanks again for your service, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you. We're getting close to our final series of votes, and I want to ask unanimous consent to enter members' comments in the record for those who are in attendance but don't have a chance to address the witnesses. And then I would ask that those members' questions be responded to the record promptly, if you could.
Mr. Chairman, we will prioritize all those questions and get them back to you immediately.
Thank you very much. Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I will be brief and try to give additional members a chance to ask the question. And you've been sitting there for 4 hours, I guess, since 9:30 answering questions, and I've been sitting here wondering if I was going to get to ask one. So I don't know who's got the worst seat in the House. But just the point I would like to make, I know a lot of tough decisions are having to be made, and we're trying to balance national security with some very serious constraints. And I do hope that after the upcoming elections that we'll get back to trying to get to the big deal where we're able to get the priorities of this country in order. And it's clear to me that the defense cannot take all of the cuts that are coming to the discretionary side of the equation, and choices have to be made. And with that, I would make this one point. The A-10s, and I know you've heard a lot about it. The F-35 has not proven itself in battle yet. Once the F-35 has proven itself in battle, I may feel differently about this, and I certainly respect General Welsh and all of you at the table as well. But for the same price over the course of 5 years, you can have 212 F-35s and 246 A-10s. Or you can have 238 F-35s, according to the numbers that come from what you've given us. So that's 212 F-35s and 246 A-10s, or 238 F-35s over the 5-year period. And I would just respectfully submit that the 246 A-10s are more important to national security and protecting our men and women and our troops in contact and can do more than 26 F-35s can. One of our admirals yesterday, it was Locklear, said, that no matter how good the plane is or the ship is, it can't be in two places at one time. And I would just hope that you would consider that recommendation as we go forward. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I will yield the remainder of my time so that other members can ask questions.
Thank you. Mr. Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the witnesses, and particularly Mr. Hale. We went through that audit review subcommittee, which at 8 o'clock in the morning every week for a while, and you did great work helping us with that. So congratulations on a great career. Mr. Secretary, your budget in terms of shipbuilding, is going to keep the Sea Power Committee busy this year. But again, obviously a lot of hard work and thought has been put into it, and again, we look forward to working with Secretary Mabus and others in that process. The investment in the SSBN design account of $1.2 billion, I think again follows up all of the strategic review studies, nuclear posture review, QDR, et cetera, about how important the replacement of the Ohio program is to our national defense, and that, number one, is a very good move in terms of trying to bring down the cost, because the more design we can put on requirements and to get that, and they've made great progress going from $7 billion to $5 billion a copy. Again, this budget, I think, shows it's serious, A, about the importance of the program, and B, about trying to continue that process of cost reduction. But obviously, looking out, we're going to hit a point when we have to start building these, that the strain on the shipbuilding account is going to be a bulge, and something's got to give here in terms of whether we can continue to maintain a 300-ship Navy and obviously meet this critical requirement. Secretary Mabus was quoted the other day about the fact that we need to start having a national conversation about how we fund this program. It is a strategic issue in terms of our national defense. The triad post-SALT II is going to show that sea-based nuclear deterrence is most survivable and probably going to be the heaviest leg of the triad. And I guess the question is how do we get that conversation out of the realm of bar talk and start really having it, serious in terms of this committee and the Pentagon in terms of whether, again, we fund it like we did, missile defense and sort of outside of the Navy's account, or whether we have to look at, restructuring, again, the respective branches' budgets. Again, we've got good work from CRS that shows it's less than 1% of DOD's overall budget. But again, I think it's an issue that 2021, when we start buying these things, seems maybe a long way away. It's not. We've got to start really focusing on this issue if we're going to protect the shipbuilding plan.
First, thank you, Congressman, for all of your time on this, and I know how integral you've been and how important your leadership's been to this. As to your question, how do you develop a national conversation? I suspect, to start with, that the budget that we are presenting this week and the QDR that was brought up this week is going to generate some considerable interest and dialogue as we go along, as it should. It'll come out of this committee, it'll come out of the Budget Committee, it'll be out of Appropriations. Everybody will have a hand at giving their opinion, as well as all the think tanks and all the writers and everybody who has something to say about this. Then I think the military organizations, military associations, those groups always have a perspective on this, and I suspect they will also weigh in on their perspective to your point, not just this budget, but this budget being kind of the platform that can be used for that larger debate, which you're talking about, which you're right, needs to be had, as to how does it integrate overall into our larger security system and our future. Economics, all that go into that as well. So I think your point is right. I would welcome that. I think we're willing partners in that. I think surely we have manifested that in every way, and we participate in every forum we're invited to. I know that's not a good answer.
No, well, it is actually, because I think it gives us some direction as we approach markup down the road that, we really need to start incorporating some real language here so that this issue gets flushed out. And again, outside of just a sort of informal process, but we need to focus on this because it's going to be a big issue for the Navy's shipbuilding plan, and we want to balance all that. So I appreciate that answer. And I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Nugent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank this distinguished panel. And first of all, I'm going to submit questions to the record, but I just want to make a statement, and particularly as it relates to our National Guard and our aviators. I don't have a dog in the fight as it relates to the Apaches, but I have had the National Guard folks come and talk to me about their brigade combat team structure as it mirrors the Army, and so I get that. But I will say, from a dad of 3 soldiers, one who's a Army National Guard chopper pilot, they train. It's not, when I was in the Air National Guard, we trained, twice a month. and then we did our summer camp. These guys train all the time. I mean, they train not only on the weekend drill, but they train to keep proficient because they have to meet the same standards as any other helicopter pilot within the Army. And so I just want to make sure that's clear in regards to my stance. And one last thing as it relates to BRAC. I was not here when the last BRAC took place, but could you tell me, since 2005 BRAC, what are the savings that we've accrued since then? Do we have a dollar amount of what we've saved?
We do, and the controller can go into as much detail as you want, but just very quickly, we're realizing from the past BRACs, I believe, about $12 billion annually in savings, and we have all that documented. How did we get to that, and so on. The last BRAC, 2005, which gets held up is the bad BRAC, costs us money, so on and so on. That BRAC is not a good one to compare, partly because...
So the next BRAC is going to be better?
No.
Okay.
Go back. Well, it will be better.
I see Mr. Hale's head shaking yes. But.
Well, the next BRAC will be better, but for comparison reasons, you can't compare something that hasn't happened.
Well,
so for comparison reasons, the 2005 BRAC was as much about reorganization as it was about savings and doing the other things that you normally get out of BRAC, or at least that's the mission of BRAC, to eliminate overhead that you don't need. Past BRACs have done that, and we've accomplished significant savings. And I think we're looking at future BRACs, if we can do this, and I'll let Mr. Hale respond here, at maybe $2 billion a year.
I don't mean to cut you short, Mr. Secretary. And Mr. Hale, if you would respond for the record to me, because I'd like to yield the rest of my time to Ms. Walorski, if you would like. Thank you very much again, gentlemen.
Thank you, Representative Nugent. Gentlemen, thanks for being here. General Dempsey, what's been your role in the foreign transfers of Gitmo detainees?
I don't have a role in the process, formal role in the process, but the Secretary of Defense takes me into consultation.
Do you concur on all those transfers? Do you have an official concurrence?
I don't have a responsibility to concur, but I consult. In other words, I discuss with the Secretary of Defense the risk in the transfer.
Do you have any concerns about the potential risk of Gitmo detainees to Yemen?
Yemen is a rather unstable platform, and so the Yemenis in Gitmo are a particular challenge to us.
And do you agree with the White House assessment that there are some Gitmo detainees that are too dangerous to transfer or release?
In general, I agree that of the 155 population, there are some who are too dangerous to transfer or release.
And Secretary Hagel, is the administration's policy still that the issue of concurrence from all national security principles is needed before a foreign transfer?
Yes, and we do that.
And do you have any reason to believe there'll be changes to this practice of concurrence?
No.
What happens if analysis by the intelligence community of a particular host country's capacity, willingness, and past practices impacts your determinations? So what if another agency comes up and says, we have a problem, for example, moving to the Sudan or releasing these people? What happens then?
Well, we'd have to resolve it. I mean, you give me a hypothetical, so we'd have to resolve it. So far, since I've been Secretary of Defense, every decision that I've made a determination on here has been concurred to.
And you don't have any reason to believe that that concurrence process will change?
No.
Okay. Thank you. I yield back my time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, the OCO budget that you've proposed is $79 billion, and yet we don't have an agreement with the Afghan government about what to do, presumably not until after the presidential election in April. So can you give us an idea what this $79 billion is for?
Yes, I can. It's not all Afghanistan, as you know, and to answer that, I'll ask the controller to
give me the Afghanistan part.
The $79 billion is a placeholder. We don't have an OCO budget and won't until conditions permit the president to make a decision about enduring presence. So there is no content behind it. It is simply a placeholder.
$79 billion placeholder?
Right.
Which is kind of in line with last year was 80-ish Year before was 80-ish.
It's based on the request from last year, and no more, no less. It's a placeholder. Once we get that decision, we will do a formal budget amendment, and then you will have detail behind it.
All right. With regards to the BAH, Basic Housing Allowance, you noted in your either testimony or in the backup material that the average for someone across the force will be about 5% out of pocket after the changes. That's a mean average. So who is it? How's that going to fall? How's that going to distribute? Who's going to be paying 0% and who's going to be paying 10%?
Congressman, everybody will be paying something.
I understand that. Okay.
So 5% is as low as we believe it would go, or as much as we would ask anyone to pay out of pocket.
I want to clarify. Okay, so the backup documents we have say an average of 5%.
Right. Let me add to that. The way we're designing it is so that the out-of-pocket cost is equal by pay grade, because we felt that would be more understandable to the
proportional to pay grade.
And so it's going to vary by the high or low-cost areas, and we can supply for the record the range. None will be zero, as the Secretary said. Some will be less than 5, some more.
All right. And finally, on TRICARE for Life, you're submitting your previous proposal on TRICARE for Life. What was the previous proposal?
That there'd be an enrollment fee of up to 1% of retired pay with a maximum of $300 per individual, except for flag and general officer retirees, then it'd be $400.
And that's for new retirees, not
Correct.
Existing. So
only those who enter on or after enactment.
Yeah. All right. Great. I just want to know what my phone calls are going to be about. Appreciate it very much.
Glad to help.
Thank you. Yield back.
I would just like to clarify the question about OCO. That doesn't just count Afghanistan, does it? And it does have other AFRICOM. There's some other expenses in there. And then we don't yet know what the final disposition of Afghanistan is going to be. So that number could go higher or it could go lower once you get to the point of actually looking at it, right?
Right. I suspect it will be lower, but we don't know yet.
Thank you. Mr. Bridenstine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Hagel, the President's initiative, the Opportunity, Security, and Growth Initiative in the budget request offers $26 billion for additional defense spending, which I think is appropriate. I think a lot of people on this committee would agree that the defense budget is inadequate, in large part because of Congress. And we want to get it fixed. The challenge is it has been tied to an additional $30 billion in domestic social spending. I was wondering, in your opinion, do you think the President would be open to the idea of supporting the Department of Defense with that $26 billion apart from the additional $30 billion in domestic social spending?
That's a decision that the President would have to make, and I can't negotiate that for him. But I believe that was presented as part of the total, our $26 billion as part of the total package, and that's the way it came in. But that would not be my role or responsibility. We are part of the total of the, I think, 58, 56, 58. Yeah.
So as the Secretary of Defense, your personal opinion, do you think it's right to hold that $26 billion hostage for an additional $30 billion in social spending?
Well, my personal opinion is an opinion of the Secretary of Defense, and so that's my.
Well, would you share that with us as the Secretary of Defense? Would that be your opinion that it's inappropriate to hold the $26 billion hostage to an additional $30 billion?
No, that was part of the President's total budget, just as we are part of the administration, and it was presented that way. Again, that's not my area. I think the OMB director was up here today. That would be a question, I think, for her.
Okay.
But no, we are part of the administration's budget proposal as a whole.
Right. But the whole package, the whole initiative, is what's troubling. I would like.
I support the whole package if that's what you're getting at.
Okay.
But that's not my responsibility. My responsibility is this $26 billion, and doing everything I can to convince the Congress that my part of it is worthy of the consideration.
I think the challenge a lot of us have on this committee is the fact that we want to be there. We want to help. But it's difficult when the president puts us in a position where, okay, we will do that if you agree to an additional $30 billion in domestic social spending. And that makes a lot of us look at the president's budget request and not take the military, the Department of Defense provisions seriously, because it's almost like he put a poison pill intentionally so that the $26 billion would never get voted on. That's the challenge a lot of us on this side of the aisle see in this president's budget request. I've got about 1:50 remaining. I'd like to ask, the next question is, when you think about the nation of Israel and the United States and our support for the nation of Israel, if Israel were to be attacked today from Iran or another neighboring country, is the United States currently prepared and ready to respond to that attack?
Go ahead.
Yes, we have some defense agreements with Israel and contingency plans to support them.
Roger that. I yield back.
Mr. Gallego.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Dempsey, you talked about there's no choice but to raid the readiness accounts, and that we have dug a 2 to 3 year readiness hole. Part of the challenge is that when I go home, people don't see sequester as a big deal. Perhaps they don't understand, perhaps they don't. So how would you, the district that I represent from El Paso with Port Bliss presence, Joint Base San Antonio on the other end, and Laughlin in the middle, it's clearly a huge issue. So how would you, if people say, for example, you can find more money through efficiencies, can you find more money through efficiencies? I mean, is that enough? Are there enough efficiencies out there to save you?
No, that's the right question, Congressman. Of course we can find more money in efficiencies, but we're talking about if you add up all of the different reductions that we're faced with, it comes out to a little over $1 trillion. You can't find $1 trillion worth of efficiencies. I think Secretary has driven us to wring out as much as we can, and we're still looking. The reason your constituents don't feel it, though, is if you've got a unit at Fort Bliss or any other post-camper station in any of the armed forces, what the community sees is whether those men and women are still getting paid, are they still coming downtown to use restaurants and make purchases. They don't really see that they may be on the base not training. And so let me use the basketball analogy. It's that time of year. It's March Madness, and I don't mean the budget, although I might make that analogy. If you have a basketball team, you can train it at individual skills, then you put it together to scrimmage itself, and then at some point you scrimmage another team, and then at some point you actually put it in a game. Because of this readiness hole, there's a large portion of the armed forces that are doing individual drills and maybe playing games against themselves, but they're not training against a world-class adversary like you would at the National Training Center or someplace.
Well, and so that ability not to train, does that in a very real way endanger our men and women in uniform as they go about trying to accomplish their missions?
I can give you a one-word answer to that, yes.
And can you give me examples of how you would, as a believer in plain English, as opposed to, the only part of politics I don't like is the political part, because we all get caught up in the politics of it all. In very plain English, what has the sequester done in 2 sentences or less? What has the sequester done to the military might of the United States?
In 2 sentences or less, it has forced us to make some bad investment decisions because we haven't had certainty, time, or flexibility to do otherwise. And it has put us in a position where we've had to raid, let me use another word, rob our readiness accounts in order to get the money we need to reduce, to find where we can reduce it, because we don't have access to the other places in a near term.
And the impact of robbing those readiness accounts is what?
Is that we are far less ready than we should be for the world that we confront.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. We have just under 6 minutes left in the vote. We have one final member's questions to work in. But we have 314 people that haven't voted, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Byrne.
Secretary Hagel, I want to ask you some questions about the littoral combat ship. In your memo of 24 February to the Secretary of the Navy and in your prepared remarks today, which are virtually identical, you say that you want to see some alternative proposals made regarding the procurement of a capable and lethal small surface combatant generally consistent with the capabilities of a frigate. And then you give the Secretary of the Navy three options, one of which is to continue with the existing LCS or modified LCS, and the other is to go forward with another existing vessel or to design a new vessel. So let me ask a couple of questions. With regard to the LCS, clearly by virtue of your wording there, if the Secretary of the Navy can show you that he can meet your requirements on capability and lethality, you would accept either an existing littoral combat ship or a modified version littoral combat ship, would you not?
I don't think that was an option I gave in my directive as to go ahead with the LCS as it is. I think if you reread that, Congressman, I don't think that was what I said.
Well, I'll read it back to you. It says options considered should include a completely new design.
A completely new design is not the same LCS.
Yes, sir. Yes. Existing ships designs, and you say including the LCS, then you say and a modified LCS. So by virtue of the fact that you include in your parenthetical including the LCS in an existing ship design, that would mean the existing LCS design.
I've given the Secretary of the Navy and the Chief of Naval Operations not options. I've given them directives as to what I want to see for them to come back to me: survivability, combat power, more capability. Can they do that with an existing design that would give more survivability, more capability, more combat power? That is not, in my opinion, why we need automatically 52 of the LCSs. The original point was the LCS is fulfilling, will fulfill the mission that we've asked it to fulfill. That's not in dispute. The bigger question, if you, and I suspect you've read the entire memo, if you build out the LCS system to 52, in a 300-ship Navy, that represents about a sixth of our Navy. Every test we've seen, never designed to do otherwise, which I agree with, but it doesn't have the survivability, capability, firepower, as ships we may well need to confront much more sophisticated adversaries, especially in the Asia-Pacific, in the next few years.
If it met those requirements, though, you would accept a modified LCS
I've
design.
said that, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That
if it meets those requirements, yes.
Now let me go to the other, and these were, the way I read it, it looked like these were options that you gave for him to look at and give you reports on. One was the development of a new design. In our current fiscal environment, which is very limited, as we've heard all day, is it practical, is it good common sense that we would actually go and design a new ship with the long time period that it would take to develop that ship and the attendant expense now that we have reached a fairly low expense on a per ship basis with the LCS down to $350 million a vessel?
Well, let's start with the LCS production lines as they are. As you know, there are two different holes.
Yes, sir.
The one made in Alabama.
Yes, sir.
The one made in Wisconsin. So there are variations to those holes, and then you put on top of that the profiles and what we need to adjust there. What the Chief of Naval Operations has advised me, and combat surface commanders have advised me, and I've gone to talk to every one of them, including your guest yesterday afternoon, Admiral Locklear, about this, is you don't need to go back and spend billions of dollars of redesigning a ship. There's a lot of design already that you could build on the existing systems or match and mix and so on. CNO says it's doable. All of his commanders tell me it's doable to come back to them back to me within the time frame I've asked, and they've agreed with it. And I think the CNO will tell you that, and I think Secretary Mabus will tell you that.
Well, I've talked to Secretary Mabus, and he's made it very clear that he considers the LCS to be a significant part of the future of the Navy. And one of the things that you've charged him with doing is looking at a potential new ship design that's based upon a frigate. The last frigate we commissioned was over 25 years ago. We don't have a frigate in operation or a shipyard that can
I
build it.
didn't say based on a frigate. I referenced frigate in there.
So the capabilities of a frigate.
Like a frigate, so it doesn't need to be a frigate.
We'd have to design a new frigate or something like a frigate to meet that requirement if we didn't go with the existing design.
I mean, that's your opinion, which I respect. What I'm saying is, the reference I'm making, is the CNO told me, sitting in my office, that they could do this. They could comply with my request. Secretary Mabus knows about this. He said, and he said it in a speech last week downtown, that it was a fair request, and he looked forward to complying to it and with it. So, yes, I know LCS is important to the Secretary. I spent a lot of time with the Secretary. I don't discount his advice. But there's enough testing out there, Congressman, that tells me and others who've evaluated this ship, there's a big question whether we want a sixth of our Navy to be LCSs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
But if we had a 500-ship Navy,
we'll buy more.
Gentlemen's time expired. Thank you very much for your patience, for your explanations, and this hearing is adjourned.